call it contemporary, different to what the traditions are. Do you think that should be encouraged? Like, does that bear more creativity and more new ways of thinking? Or because, like you said there, if Camus is someone who people kind of think of and they're like, get a load of that guy, like what's he talking about? Do you think that's a bad attitude? There shouldn't be that attitude. It should just be let everyone kind of creatively think about.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's I mean, there are good and bad thinkers, right? I mean, I don't
100%.
think, I mean, so, but to kind of come at it with, okay, this is the framework, and if you don't fit into this framework, you don't count. That's problematic.
Yeah, I feel like in any group or in any sort of thinking, Now, granted, like you said, you can have like good thinkers, bad thinkers. You can have people who are like objectively wrong and objectively right, let's say, but. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like once again that kind of comes back to the whole thing of nowadays of if you're not trying to write the story one way, it's like, what are you doing? It's like when I was talking about the political stuff there. Like, for instance, if I have different political views to my friends, some of them, it's not going to be let's have a conversation. It's going to be like, right, I'm just going to call you names. And even I think a lot of that nowadays is what you see is it's branding people with certain names. Like even you'll see, and this isn't necessarily the way I want to go with the podcast whatsoever. So don't worry. But like people being called Nazis. On the other side, everyone's being called a wokey. It's like, it's just like weaponizing language for a reason that I seem to be just like, pointless isn't even the word because it has a point, but that's actually, it's unraveling, like I said, what it means to have a conversation, what it means to kind of be.
But even more seriously, I mean, it's unraveling democracy. That's what we're seeing around the world. Right?
Yes, exactly.
Because the only way a democratic country works is if people accept diversity of viewpoints. Right? That's the only way it works. Right? Otherwise, why not give all the power to one guy? Right? So it's Do you see society becoming more totalitarian with time? Because I've heard people saying that now I actually can't even remember where I said. Maybe it was a short that I was scrolling. Like this me doom scrolling once again. But actually, luckily, some of my stuff on YouTube, when I'm on YouTube and I'm scrolling, it actually tends to be kind of like educational stuff. I think is, if it's anyway good, it's decent. But it was saying that totalitarianism will be making a comeback. Like when you think of like Trump now, when you think, I don't even know how you define Trump. You have Putin, you have Kim Jong-un, North Korea. Like this is China as well. I don't know. Is China considered totalitarian? I would consider totalitarian for sure.
Do you believe that the world is becoming more totalitarian in like a political sense?
Undoubtedly, at the moment, I think it is. Yeah. I mean, you have to see this in the round, right? I mean, we've got a number of crises, right? We've got biodiversity crisis. We've got a climate change crisis. And one of the consequences of that is resources are becoming, in a global level, resources are becoming less and less available, right? And so in that context, people want to control more power. They want to control power within themselves. They want to protect themselves and protect their interests. And that's always what happens, right? I mean, we see this in the 1930s, where there was a real, jolt to the capitalist system, to the economic system. And the totalitarian regimes came out of that, right? And came out of the First World War, and so there's a whole kind of trajectory there.
Yes.
But and we see this happening again. I mean, I have no doubt that is what's happening. We see it in the United States. We see those type of totalitarian kind of tendencies happening in Europe. I mean, they haven't got there yet, but certainly in Germany, there's the Alternative für Deutschland. You've got the regime in Italy is one that has very kind of right-wing leanings and I would say tending towards totalitarian leanings in some ways. So yeah, I think we can see this around the world.
And you said one thing there, kind of capitalism leading to that totalitarianism culture and maybe political demographic. Do you believe then in the sense that capitalism, well, that is maybe the political system or the economic system that we abide by, generally speaking, throughout the world, the USA, here in Europe, do you think that is what, do you think if we keep going on the same route with this capitalistic sense, people say there's a thing called late stage capitalism in the sense that, it's just going to become self-consuming in a manner. So that's going to lead back to totalitarianism. What do you think that late stage capitalism is that bad?
Well, I think it's unsustainable.
Unsustainable.
I mean, a continual growth is unsustainable within a finite globe that we live in, right? And so there's only two real alternatives. The one is to find other resources, and you could be beginning to see that with the space exploration becoming privatized, right? That's a very, very recent thing, right? That we privatize space exploration. Or the alternative is that we remain within our finite resources. Those become less and less available, right? Because the way capitalism has functioned and the way it's succeeded in the 20th century is that, yes, people have made a lot of money, but others have benefited, right? I mean, for the most part, there was a lot of now I'm talking about obviously in the Western world, not so much outside the West, but even in so-called developing countries, there was the possibility of more wealth, more distribution of wealth, but I think that's becoming less and less possible now, and we see this, right? We see that there's such a disparity of wealth across the board.
So yeah, and I think that's an interesting point, because there's someone I watched, his name is Gary Stevenson, and his big thing and his big topic that he talks about is wealth redistribution, because he's saying if wealth gets concentrated, they're going to control the majority of the power in a society. So I suppose that maybe even brings it back to then, I can definitely see it amongst my age group. There's a push for, I don't know if it's full-blown socialism or Marxism or anything that's kind of centric to that ideology. Is that something that you think will, if we keep going totalitarian in one sense, the people are going to be like, well, in order to balance this, now we're going to start pushing socialism. It feels like the political spectrum, when it once was, maybe I'm leaning right or maybe I'm leaning left, but now it's like the spectrum in the middle doesn't matter anymore. It's such like that's what it feels like for people in my age group. So do you think that might be something that we'll see in the next, I don't know, maybe 10 years, if we're trying to fight back against this totalitarian regimes around the world? Will socialism start to come more forefront? Do you think that will be something that people will talk about more, let's say, will consider voting for more?
That I don't know, right?
Yeah.
I don't know, how things are going to work their way out. But what I do think is that maybe we should begin to think beyond these alternatives, right? Beyond these binary alternatives, because to a large extent, right, left wing, it goes back to the French Revolution, right? This is a relatively new way of thinking political division. It suited a certain world. Coming out the 19th century into the 20th century, I think we're in a different world now. One of my favorite philosophers who just died, Bruno Latour, well worth reading, a French philosopher. And he said words to the effect of the problem is that we're living in a world that no longer exists, right? So in other words, we're living as if, for example, we have endless resources, that nature is there for us to exploit and we can use to build up our economy and continue expanding and growing and so on. That world doesn't exist. That world is collapsing around us. We see it all over, and not just in terms of our political systems, but also in terms of our climate, in terms of our loss of biodiversity. All of that is making, all that has knock-on effects that are going to make the life that we live today unsustainable. Mm-hmm. And so I think like I'm not in politics. I'm a philosopher. Yeah. I try to think about these things, but I think my role as a philosopher is to try to think, okay, on what basis can such a new way of living be founded? Like, how do we need to think about ourselves, the world around us, to make a more sustainable life possible?
So, and even I feel like that is nearly kind of an abstract way of thinking outside the box, that, it's a very binary decision at the moment of, totalitarianism on this side, so we're going to go socialist then on this side. In trying to make that new society, or that new, let's say, program or plan for how we can live better together, how do you think, because I always think that humans have always been driven to a certain point by greed, and that's why we're seeing the power grab nowadays, the power grab for resources and all that kind of stuff. Do you think it's going to be possible to get to a stage where we can kind of break past the totalitarianism, socialism, the current political spectrum we have, if we're still kind of grounded in greed? And I suppose maybe to a certain point, what is your opinion on greed? Do you think humans are inherently greedy? Is that something maybe you've thought about at all?
I don't think so. I don't think human beings are inherently greedy. I think the society that we live in is molded around an idea of human greed, right? But I don't see it as, I mean, if we were inherently greedy, we wouldn't cooperate with one another for each other's good, right? We would be at each other's throats. I mean, there's a sense in which the notion of human beings as greedy is rooted in a very kind of radical individualism, where it says, you know, it's me against the world, right? I think you look historically, you look, say, at Aboriginal cultures, you look at pre-modern cultures within Europe, you look at in the East, you see many different societies not based on that principle. So I think it's a myth. I think it's a generalization from our own society. I mean, of course, human beings are greedy, but human beings are also empathetic. Human beings are also loving. People, you know, it's like we have a multifaceted motivations, multifaceted emotional engagement with the world.
Yes, so it's a balance, you know, like you're saying, empatheticness or being empathetic and then also being greedy. You know, I feel like nowadays it's nearly been like greed is the main thing people talk about, but then again, you know, humans have always been empathetic. We've always been community people. We've helped each other throughout millennia. So, yeah, I suppose that's an interesting way of looking at it. Like, even my opinion would be that, you know, I always would have thought to a sense that greed was kind of the overarching thing that's stopping us from maybe trying to move on to getting a society where we're all kind of on the same level playing field, let's say. But then again, maybe it's just a case of, you know, like for me anyways, and probably for other people out there, we need to think more, you know, humans aren't just one thing.
Right.
We're a multifaceted, and that even probably leads into kind of, you know, and what you were talking about and how you define the self, you know, you're talking about relation with different things. So I suppose that I would love to move on to that. Right now then, how would you, or not even right now, just in general, how would you define the self? You said it's, to me before, it's kind of like a relation. So I'd like to hear more about that.
Well, that's not me. I'm actually quoting Kierkegaard in saying that, right? The self is a relation, Kierkegaard says, and I think he's absolutely right. I mean, it's like one of the philosophical conundrums has been that we get right through, you know, you people like Hume have talked about this, a lot of contemporary philosophers talk about it, is what is the self, right? And one of the mistakes, I think, is to imagine the self as something like a thing, right? But you think about like things. I mean, I think a good way of thinking about this is a thing is something you can point to, right? I can point to this there, right? This and what am I doing? I'm pointing to a certain thing with certain qualities. It's blue. It's shaped so that somebody can sit in it or whatever. The self isn't like that. I can't point at the self. You know, I point at individuals who are selves in some way. And what do I do? Like when I point at something, when I point at myself, I can give you certain qualities, right? I've got certain quality of hair, I've got a certain nationality, I've got a certain gender, and so on. And you know, if we're doing profiles or whatever, that's what we put down, right? That's what we are. But that's not the self. The self is how I relate to that. How I relate to being male, being Irish, or whatever the case may be, and how I relate to all other beings, all other entities that I'm engaged with. So that's what I mean by being a relation, right? That the self is that relation. I won't even want to say first of all, because I don't think it is first, but the one my relationship to myself. I don't want to say it's first because that's based on other relations, right? Yeah. We come out of relations that precede us, right? Before we were ever born, before we even conceived, probably, there were relations there that led to us, right? That made us possible, and not just possible in a physical sense, but possible also in a sense of what types of beings we are, right? And so the self is, if you like, we're all selves that were little kind of parts of these interrelations in which we all belong.
Yes.
Yeah.
So do you think then nowadays there's definitely, I can speak for my age group, there's more of an individualistic sense with life nowadays, and that it's all me. It's not really to do with my relations with, let's say, nature, my relations with you, my relations with. So do you think that individualistic mindset, is that going to stop people from figuring out their self, who they are? Is that mindset of today of everything's me? Is that hindering people from finding out who they are?
Well, it's a certain way of being who you are, right? So my radical individualism is a certain way of understanding that relation that I'm talking about, right? So, but it's a way in which it gives priority to the relation I have with myself, and then sees everything outside itself as kind of some sort of building stones or some kind of resource in order to help that self to flourish or develop, you know.
Okay.
And then every other self is supposed to be has value only to the extent to which they can cooperate with me to help me to make myself the best self I can be.
Yes.
That I think, to me, it's a very prevalent view of the self, but I think it's a very impoverished one.
Okay.
And it's one that also is based on certain self-delusions, you know. And one of the most, you know, one of the phrases that comes with this is, right, the self-made man, right, which is one of the most self-delusional phrases, right, because anybody who has made it in any sphere depends on so many different people.
Yes.
Right. You know, it's so interesting for you. We were talking about one of my books before we started, right? And any book in philosophy, but academic books generally, you'll see, and not just academic books, you'll see acknowledgements at the beginning, right? And what are they saying? They're saying that this book would not be possible but for all these. Yes, this one person is the author, but that book only depended for it coming to being on all these other relations that author happened to find themselves in. And that's and it's the same for anything. You know, you build up a business, it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so I think that self-delusion is very damaging, you know, and like every delusion, it's just hiding us not just from the truth but also from possibilities, ways in which we can engage with others.
Where do you think that self-delusion stems from then?
Historically, it stems from a certain, it's a complex history, but certainly a certain way of understanding Christianity, I think.
Okay.
And this, you know, and you can trace that back to the 17th century, 16th century. I think it also stems in a more kind of positive sense. Well, no, that's not necessarily negative, but like in a more kind of, I guess, socially grounded sense, it comes from a rebellion against a certain way of understanding society and community, where the individual felt themselves hindered, felt themselves constrained. You know, and capitalism grows out of that, right? Is that a sense of trying to break from traditional ways of doing things, traditional ways of engaging with one another, to build a society rooted in individuals. So there's a certain sense in which it's a kind of a rebellion against an overly restraining traditional community.
Okay.
And you see that in the States, right? I mean, America is built from people trying to flee certain kind of constraints. You see that in Ireland, right? People go to, you know, I mean, in the 1950s, or even when I went to Canada in the 1980s, the sense of like Ireland is this constraining place, right? Where your individuality couldn't get anywhere, and so you went to America where you had a chance, you know. Mm. So there's a sense, so I don't want to be like totally negative about this, right? There's a sense in which, right, that this individuality is important, right?
Yes.
But the delusion comes from thinking, well, I don't need anybody, right? I can do this on my own.
Yeah. And I feel like definitely nowadays there is even that trend, and even with the, I don't know if you'd call it like the manosphere. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's a thing of like, we can do this all ourselves. It's all on. I know, like I said at the start when we started this podcast, I like the sense that this is kind of, I'm totally accountable for this. But at the same time, I'm totally accountable for how good the podcast does. But I'm also, you know, I also need the help of yourself. I need the help of John on the cameras, you know, everyone. Like, this isn't a thing that if I make it out of into a successful life with the podcast, it's not going to be like, oh, Harry, you're the greatest guy ever. Like, there's so many people that need to help you to get to a certain point with literally everything in your life. And that's something that I feel like we're losing a lot, is that sense of community, and that the people around you, they're the springboards. Right. Like community is where you're going to find your springboard. If you were trying to figure out, more about yourself and how you're gonna improve, seeing people around you, being with people around you, and not even to the point of like letting them help you, but interacting with people, helping other people help you. I feel like that's something we're losing big time. The individualistic mindset is just taking over. Is that somewhat stemming from, let's say, social media and, let's say, technology to a certain point? For instance, like, I'm posting on my Instagram and showing off my life, and my life is so important. Not that I think that people are posting thinking they're so self-important, but it's nearly... It seems like it's not the community anymore. It's now I have all these individualistic things that I post about myself, I do about myself. Is that mindset, is the community sense something we can return to? And if so, how do we go about returning to that community sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I have a good answer to that. I mean, I think it's so I don't know how we get. I'm not sure going back though is the right way to think of it.
Yes.
I think that maybe is the part. I don't think there's never going back, right? We can't go back because to go back assumes that we can somehow erase what went before, and I don't think that's possible.
Yes.
So it has to be a case of trying to rebuild community on some basis, right?
Yes.
And I think, like, if you think about communities, traditionally, right, they're based on a sense of place, right? They're communities built, they live in a certain place, they grow up together, they have family relations together, and so on. And that's becoming much more diffuse today, right? We move around a lot, and we have different, we live in a place, and we've got the immigrants who come in who have very different traditions and very different ways of doing things. And so then it's a question of how do you then build community on that basis? And I think you do that by thinking about the notion of community is kind of something that where we find a commonality together, right? And I think that commonality, to me, has to be today about how we engage with the crises that we're facing as human beings, and that's where we have to find that commonality. Is what is it that binds us together in the sense that we need each other? What do we need each other for? And I don't just mean in a very kind of utilitarian sense. I just mean in the widest sense of being human beings. And that's what we need to discover. So that's my best. That's my best shot.
And I actually think I really agree with you there, and the point you make about not going back, I think that's also a very good point. And maybe I worded myself wrongly, because even what you say about going back, if we go back to the old sense of community, let's say 40 years ago, when there probably wasn't as much access to like travel, technology, like planes, boats, being able to move country so easily, that's come to a point now where the old sense of community maybe being, just Irish people, that's now changing, So going back to the way it was, that's definitely not the answer, because we've got so many new cultures and so many, I don't even know what you'd call it, but it's such a diverse culture now that if you want to build that sense of community, it's not going to be like the old sense of community, because that was different,
Exactly.
So I think that's and to me that kind of not it scares me to a certain point, but that's been something that we haven't found yet, and we don't really know how to find it. And I think that even to a sense, it's not that there's community, but it's nearly on the other end. I feel like there's nearly friction between the groups, and I definitely feel like if that's not something we solve, that will cause some great issues. So, and once again, I would ask you, what your answer is there, but I think, like you said there, you don't really. Well,
I don't. But I think it's. I mean, the parameters are kind of like, again, I absolutely agree. I mean, nostalgia is not a response, right?
But
that's what we're getting, right? I mean, so much nostalgia out there, right? Make America great again, right? It's a nostalgic view, right? You don't yes, there were some strengths in Irish communities, say 50 years ago, but there was a lot, as we know, a lot of pathologies, right? And so we definitely don't want to go back there. And so it's a question of, okay, how do we find a way of living together? And I think, we need to think about, like, to me, one of the ways we do this is we begin to think about who it is who's together in this, right? Because implicit in our conversation so far is the communities of you and I, right? People, human beings, in other words, right? But you go outside the store, and there's a lot of other different beings there, right? There's sheep, there's cattle, there's foxes, there's trees, and so on, right? We live in community with all these other beings, you know, and it seems to me that sense of community is something we really need to think about, you know, because and again, in terms of need, right? We need them, right? Something as simple as bees, right? We lose all the bees, we're gone, right?
No more pollination.
Yeah,
that is that.
That's it.
That is that.
That's where.
I fully agree.
You know, so there's a real sense need of community between us and say our bee population, but also the other beings around us. You know.
And that actually, I think that's a great point. And that kind of brings me back to what I wanted to talk about, kind of with greed and stuff. The fact that we're not thinking about the bees. Yeah. Maybe we're not thinking about other, like even out in the Amazon, they're cutting out the rainforest at a crazy rate.
Yeah.
Like, why do humans think that we can just do whatever we want? Now, obviously, to a certain point, everyone has free will. Well, I would like to think we have free will. I don't know what your opinion is on free will, but I would like to think everyone can do whatever they think is right and whatever they want to do. But why do humans think that we're somehow above the community of life? Outside this room right now, out in your front garden, all the trees, all the insects, the animals, anything like that. Why do humans think that we're above that?
I'm not sure necessarily that humans do. I mean, okay. I think that's a problem where we kind of generalize to humans. I think there's certain ways of living as human beings that do that. I'm not sure all human communities have in the past or even today do. I mean, some human communities have ways of living with, excuse me, with other beings in a much more productive way than we do.
Yes.
So again, it comes back to the question of greed, right? I really would push back against this idea that, you know, we humans have a certain way of doing things, because apart from anything else, if that is true, then I think we're doomed. Right. And I'm sorry to be so dramatic.
That's going to make a great clip. We're doomed. Philosopher says we're doomed. No, but that's. I agree with you. I agree.
If human beings really are what we've been told, these greedy, kind of non-empathetic beings that, in the end of the day, are basically, you know, only looking out for themselves and their own interests, then that's unsustainable, right?
It can only end one way.
Right.
It can only end one way.
Yeah.
I find it so, I don't know if it's scary or if it's just that, like, we don't have an exposure to the thought of, you know, they talk about climate change and how in the next, I can't put a figure on it, so I'm not going to, but in the near future, the climate change will become irreversible. But yet, you know, in China, they're still opening up new coal plants. Make America Great is trying to bring production home so they can start more steel plants, more things that are essentially just going to burn electricity, put more greenhouse gases into the environment. So, you know, why can't we see down the line that this is going to be irreversibly bad, but we don't care? Why is that a propensity of the human mind not to be able to look into the future and say, well, let's not do that because this is going to be bad, but instead we can do this now. We can make more money now. And once again, maybe is that coming back to the capitalistic mindset? I don't know, but why can't we see to the future and say, the next people that come we need to leave this good for the next people that come, you know what I mean? And if we're not going to do that, why aren't we doing that?
Again, that's a really difficult question. I mean, I think it was Lyotard, I could be wrong on that, but said, you know, we can more easily imagine the end of humanity than we can imagine the end of capitalism. And I think it's a great line because again, what it points to is imagination, right? Imagination is so important here, right? Being able to imagine, and that's why, you know, philosophers to a large extent depend on the artists, right? You know, philosophers are, in a certain sense, philosophers come later, right? We kind of think through what artists and writers through imagination manage to kind of conceive of first. And so I think we need our artists, we need our writers to, in terms of imagining a world different to the world we're in today. So I think that's the first point, right? And because you see, it's like think about everything in this room. Like think about the lighting, or everything, like what went into building this house. This is this is a house in the country that needs its own septic tank or whatever for all of that. That's a huge amount of resources being put into our lives, but we don't think of it that way. Right? We think, well, this is how you live, right?
It's just how it is.
This is how it is. Right?
Magically goes in the ground, goes away.
Yeah.
We don't think any further.
Exactly. We don't think about it any further.
Yeah.
And then you think, well, but how then can you imagine? And imagine again in this context doesn't just mean thinking out, like thinking about it. Imagine it in the sense of placing yourself in that situation. How would I live differently? How do I live differently than I do today? And I think it's really difficult. I mean, it's really trying to imagine a new world, right? A world very different to the world we exist in, and people who many of the people went before us existed in.
Yeah, and I think that's something interesting too, because like you say, you have to sit and think about that. That's not something you're going to get when you're on your phone, when you're doing so. Like you need to sit and kind of relax and let that bored brain take over and try and think of these things. So in a way, if innovation and creativity is something that is necessary for the future to figure out how we're going to live a more sustainable life, it just seems so crazy to me that everything nowadays is like you literally have that magic electronic brick in your hand. That's what I call it, and that's going to be something that's going to take us away from figuring out what the sustainable future is actually going to be. But the thing is, once again, we don't care, because now we have the magic electronic brick, and I can feel good now.
Yeah.
So if I'm going to feel good now, I don't really care about what's going to come down the line.
Right.
Is that going to be something humans will ever be able to get rid of? That the need for self-gratification, instant self-gratification, especially nowadays, because I feel that that's increased more and more throughout the years. Everything has become immediate. Is that nearly the reason why that we can't think of maybe living a more sustainable way, because we're nearly brainwashed into thinking, oh, well, this is fine. I'm getting dopamine now, so if I'm getting dopamine, I must be doing the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot in that. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, this is something that's not, in a one sense, not new. I mean, we even, you read St. Augustine in a very different context, but he's talking about distraction, right? He's talking about, in his context, it's just being distracted from God. Yeah. But it's a similar kind of a problem, right? That we get distracted by immediate goods, immediate pleasures, and forget about kind of the wider picture often, And I think that is, it requires an attention, I think. It requires the capacity to attend beyond this distracting thing that's actually drawing our attention, right? It requires a kind of a movement of thought, right? And I think that's something that we need to practice. And I think it needs to be in our educational system that we need to practice, right? We need to, because there's a whole traditions both in Europe and in the East of how to do that, of how to train the mind to move away from that which is distracting them. And we require that. We require that as individuals, and we require that as a society.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I don't know if that's like, well, once again, I feel like we could rant about the educational system, but let's not do that. But in a sense, then, would you kind of really recommend people to try and spend some more time just not distracted, just sitting and just thinking? Like, there's a trend going around nowadays where people will literally go and stare at a wall for an hour, and they'll record themselves doing it, and then they'll get views and likes and whatever. So obviously maybe there's other vested interests, but like sometimes people will say like, that was the best thing I could have done. You know what I mean? So it probably requires just a bit more time alone to kind of think about these things a bit more.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Hannah Arendt, one of my philosophical heroes, she makes a very clear and strong distinction between loneliness and solitude. She says these are two very separate things.
And that's a question I was just about to ask you, so let's get into that. I'm very interested in that. Loneliness and solitude, how do you, what differentiates the solitude that maybe, or the solitude maybe that helps us, that allows us to invest in ourselves and figure out, you know, who we're going to be? And then what's the difference between that loneliness then that nearly leaves just a gaping hole inside you? Do you feel you don't, like, how does that, what's that relation?
Again, it goes back to this notion of relation that I talked about earlier, right? I mean, so in an events account, at least, solitude is kind of where I am in conversation with myself, right? where it's I'm relating to myself, and that's what he thinks, what he understands thinking to be. Right? Thinking is that kind of self-relation where I relate to myself. But when I'm relating to myself, of course, I'm relating to all the experiences which make up myself. So I'm actually relating to everybody else at that same time, right? I'm just concentrated on. I'm not concerned at the moment with that person in terms of themselves. I'm concerned with how I can think about them, how I can make sense of them and everybody else. All those relations that are making me up. In terms of loneliness, on the other hand, it's when I lose that relation. I feel myself cut off. I just don't feel I have any relation with anybody else, and I can't establish that, right? And at least in events terms, I mean, certain things are necessary. Things like trust, certain things of risk taking, right? All of these things are necessary for those relations, right? And when I lose that capacity to trust, that capacity to take risk, that's when I can fall back into loneliness. Yeah.
So solitude is more to the point of you're still able to establish that relation with other things, other people, how they're thinking. Maybe nature itself, and then loneliness is more so the thing of, you know, if you have some entity here, everything has just been, there's a cocoon around that person now. Yeah. How does someone get to that point? Why do people get to the point of loneliness and maybe not the solitude? What makes them feel like they're cut off from others?
I have a colleague in Canada, Diane Enns, who works on this precisely on this topic. So I share. You'd be better talking to her than me, basically.
But put her on the list. Put her on the list. Next person up.
In terms of this topic, but I think, I mean, so I'm really talking out of a certain degree of ignorance here. But
that's no problem. You're like, just because you're giving your opinion, I'm not thinking it's gospel, you know. But I'm so interested to hear what you have to say on that. Yeah. Be right or wrong, if that even exists. It's just interested in your opinion.
I think, God, I think there's a number of factors, but one factor I think is really needs to be taken into account is the way in which our societal structures place us into loneliness, you know, and don't allow those connections, break those connections down, you know. And I think, and again, I think social media has a lot to do with this, but not only social media. I think there's you talked earlier about community, right? I mean, when that sense of community breaks down, because human beings, I mean, human beings are a very fragile entity. You know, it's very, you know, you see like, you know, again, you go out in the fields here in the calving season, right? You see a calf, like, 10 seconds later, it's on its feet, right? A human being takes, you know, a long time. A long time.
I feel like I still need that time now. I'm still trying to. Yeah.
And a lot of nurturing and a lot of care, right? You know, and it's that and that we need to be cared for, and we need care, and that structure of being cared for and caring. We get it hopefully in our families, but we need it also in the wider world, you know, and when that breaks down, or at least when we don't perceive it anymore, right? Yes. Is where and it can be perception, right? I mean, like a lot of the kind of rhetoric about crime, you know, is often exaggerated for political reasons, right? And then you say, oh, well, what's the message there? Well, people, not only are people not going to care for me, people are going to do me harm. Yes. So I better stay where I am. I better stay put. I better put a wall around myself and close myself. Yes. Exactly. And that's very damaging, you know.
So in a way, hate to put on my John O'Laughlin, to put on my tinfoil hat here now for a minute, but I think a lot of the times, a lot of social media and a lot of, I feel like nearly even news to a certain point, in maybe the last few years, not that it's all turned into fear-mongering, but I feel like a certain amount of it is becoming, I don't want to use the term weaponized because that's too radical of a term, but I feel like I'll give you this example. I'll sit down with my dad and I'll be having dinner, let's say. My dad will be with me. It'll be 6 o'clock. We'll be watching the news. And I'll be watching the news. And now, albeit maybe in the world today there is only bad news, but it seems like all I'm seeing is bad news. And then to a point, does that nearly influence someone to say, well, if you're seeing the 6 o'clock news every day and you're seeing that everything is always bad, so then you're going to think everything is always bad.
Yeah.
Is that something... I don't know if you think about that at all. You don't have to put on the tinfoil hat with me too, but I don't know if you're my standpoint on it is the media a lot of the times are putting us in this cocoon nearly, because like you said there, if it's only going to be fear mongering and bad things, you're probably going to think, well, if there's only bad things outside, there's only bad things on the news, not that you're going to think automatically everything is bad, but it's going to be more of a propensity. The more familiar you become with hearing bad news, you're going to be like, well, everything's just bad.
Yeah.
Is the media somewhat to blame in there? And if that's a question you don't want to answer, that's completely fine. We can just go to another question.
I mean, I'm not sure I'm really qualified to answer it.
I'm definitely not qualified to give the what you call it I gave. So yeah, that's a point I want to make. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, media is there. Well, I mean, I think media is multifaceted again, right? I mean, there's also, when we talk about media, we're talking about many different things, right? But the role of the media is to inform us, and to inform us about what's going on in the world, in as objective a manner as possible, but of course it's selective, and in a certain sense, it's that's where the issue is. It seems to me, right? I mean, it's how those selections are made. What do we hear about? Yes, we hear a lot about bad things, but a lot of things that are happening in the world that are pretty bad we don't hear about at all, right? And it's like, I think it's the response to that, right? It's like, well, and it's the analysis. I think what we need more of is kind of not just this thing happened, right? But like, why did it happen?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
And who's doing what about that?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Like the things you see on the news at the moment, it's like maybe some people were killed in like a bomb strike or something like that. But how much of the time is there research and how much of the time are the people told the story behind all this, why it's happening, what's going on? Because I feel like now, granted, maybe they can't give that story all the time because how long would the news be?
Sure.
But at the same time, how many times have I logged on the news and something terrible has happened and I've gotten no context?
Yeah.
I've literally got no context.
Yeah.
And then all I'm seeing is just bad things, no context.
Right. And you see that then kind of. I remember when I went, when you see your own country, you see it being portrayed elsewhere. You can see exactly how that works, right? Like I remember when I first went to Canada. This was in '89, so the Troubles were still going on, and I remember getting into a taxi, and the taxi driver I said I was from Ireland. And he basically, in so many words, he basically kind of had this image of me kind of dodging bullets, getting to the airport to fly to Canada, right? Yeah. And I kind of was saying to him, no, actually, that's kind of in, maybe, there's violence kind of in Belfast and there, but where I am, and he wouldn't hear it.
Yeah.
I mean, so like as far like I was kind of the witness coming from the place, right?
Yeah.
But for him, no, what he had heard in the news was true, and he had seen all these bombings and so on. And so there you can see, okay, it's not that it's not true, right? All those things happened, but it was not really contextualized in a way that anybody could really understand.
Beneficially,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I don't want to go too tinfoil hat, but that's just something I've always thought the media is like, and I think that's a great point you make there about contextualizing what's actually happening, why it's happening. Now, granted, like we said, if you did that for every situation, the news would be all day. The news would never end.
Yeah.
But I think that's a very interesting point. And I kind of want to pivot back to there's something you said there about nurture. Humans need to be nurtured. We take so long to develop. And I'm curious, the nature versus nurture argument, and I know maybe that might be very surface level and a generalized statement, but where is your position on the nature versus nurture argument? Do people become who they are or who they are surely going to be? Or do the people around us shape us? And maybe, you know, I made one decision in one situation, but maybe I could have made a different decision if I had different guidings from parents or something like that. How does the nature versus nurture argument look for you in terms of how people turn out to who they're actually going to be?
Well, I think there's two questions there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the nature, nurture, and then the question of freedom, I think, is implicit in what you're asking, right?
Yeah, sounds great.
Nature, nurture, I find a problematic distinction because I think, you know...
I was going to say maybe you would think it is that, you know, like it's just like a buzz question you need to ask, like nature and nurture, but is it that simple? It's probably more nuanced than just...
Yeah, because nature is nurturing, right, in the sense, and I know, and I don't want to be flippant, but like, I mean...
Nature's nurturing?
Yeah.
Clip that. Nature's nurturing? Wow, crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just nurturing, obviously, but like, I mean, there's a strong element of nurturing. All beings nurture to some extent, well, animal beings at least, and maybe even plant beings. We're reading really fascinating things about trees where maybe there's a certain degree of nurture.
Communication and something going on. Yeah,
absolutely.
Crazy.
But anyway, that's beside the point in a way. But so it's kind of like, so it's and specifically in terms of who we are, right? The nature of who you are when you're born is a kind of a product of all this, nature in the sense of materiality, but also in the sense of history, in the sense of environment, in the sense of all of this that makes up kind of the context of you as you grow up. And again, that's got to do with this relationality I talked about, right? You're embedded in these, you're entangled in these relations,
yes.
right? And you, all of us, have to somehow negotiate that, right? And I have a problem with the notion of free will, just because...
This is so interesting, because this is a question I've always wondered, is free will real?
Well, just because I think the question of will, what the will is a very problematic one,
okay,
right?
Yeah.
So the notion of free will, the kind of the image you get from that is, right, so you're in a situation, you're embedded in all these relations I just talked about, and then there's kind of like an inner space in here that you go into, and you kind of make a kind of a decision in that inner space, and then you go out into the world and do it, right? And that I think is really just not how things work, right? I don't think that's how things work. Where what really happens, what I think is more a better way of thinking about this, is that you are continually responding to the world around you. You're continually responding to these relations, right? And you find ways of responding that seem best to you in a particular situation. Does that decision come solely from you? No, of course it doesn't. But are you somehow being determined by everything around you? I don't think how it works either, right? I mean, because I think relations are ones where all these different kind of beings and entities and situations you're entangled in, they're all continually responding to each other, right? So like, you know, I talk to you and I see, you know, you make your face changes, right? You give a certain expression, and then I'm kind of thinking, okay, what does that mean? Does that mean he's interested in what I'm saying? Does he say, now, am I boring him? And
you're not boring me. You're definitely not boring me.
And I respond accordingly, right? And it's not that I kind of make this kind of a very kind of a free will decision. Okay, now I'm going to do this. No, I'm in continual response to the world around me.
Yes.
And this is, if I may, I'll tell it.
You can may as much as you want.
Because I'll tell a story. I always tell this story when I'm trying to explain freedom in class. Is
Great.
When I first went to Germany, I didn't have a lot of German, but I knew that frei meant free, and I knew bad meant swimming pool, right? And so there was a Freibad, right? So what would you think that meant? Free swimming pool.
Yeah, free.
You can get in for free, right? So off I go in, and I have to pay, right? And I said, but 5-ad. And he says, yeah, but not cost and loss, right? So in other words, it may be a 5-ad, but it's not without cost, right? I have to pay.
Yes.
The reason for that is the word fly here means something like open, right? What 5-ad meant, it was open air, right? It wasn't an indoor pool; it was an open air pool.
Okay.
Kind of like if you're in a restaurant, and you ask, "Is this chair free?" Right? You're not asking, "Does the chair have free will?" Is it going to, that
it's going to walk away on me?
Yeah, exactly.
Can I bring it home with me?
But you're asking, "Is it open?" Right?
Yes.
And I think freedom is that openness, right? It's the parameters, the possibilities in. Where we can act and which are limited, are always finite, but they're almost never, unless we're talking about concentration camps or situations of severe depression, they're almost never totally limited and determinate, right?
Yes.
We almost always have degrees of possibility.
Yeah.
And that's where our freedom lies, And
even I think that's what, like, the point you made there, like when you're talking to me, you can see that I'm responding a certain way. So then, like, you're responding then in a certain way because of that. Exactly. But like, is that free will, or is that you just responding to your environment? But then at the same time, to think that your free will doesn't have anything to do with that, like obviously it does to a certain point. So. It's me wanting the simple answer of, do you have free will or do you not have free will? When really it's more of a question of, well, these things, like you said, they're entangled. They're a relation between one another. And I think that's something I struggle with too sometimes, because, and maybe it's just, maybe I'm going to use the term, I won't use the term, I'm a bit dumb, but I just want the simple answer. I just want, is it either free will or is it free will doesn't exist or whatever? But, maybe the answer isn't as simple as it seems. And maybe that's what the philosophers have.
Well, you said, because
you're correct there. Like, I would like to think it's either free will or not, but like maybe you're complicating, but like the way you complicate it to me there, that makes sense. Like that's.
Well, that's what I said to you before we started, right? That philosophers are bloody-minded people, right? We make what may appear simple complicated, right? And that's kind of our job, right?
Yeah.
And it's our job for a purpose, right? Because I think part of the like one of the things philosophers try to do is that they question presuppositions, right? And I mean, I think I quoted to you earlier before we started the definition I got of philosophy is radical thinking, and radical in the sense in the kind of etymological sense of the word radox, meaning root, getting to the roots of things,
Yes.
And I think once you think in that way, what you find is that there's all sorts of, like what we think is self-evident and common sense, often there's all sorts of presuppositions underlying it that we're not really aware of,
So things aren't as simple as maybe they seem.
Yeah.
But we can operate on a level where if we think things are as simple, we'll be fine. But when you really think about it, then, well, actually, maybe there is a deeper level to this. Yeah. So then it's kind of the thing of like, do you want to really figure it out, or do you want to just operate as a normal person? And it doesn't really matter too much.
Exactly. I mean, one of my philosophical heroes, Edmund Husserl, talks about philosophy as being unnatural, right?
Okay.
Unnatural in the sense of, he's using the word natural in the sense of kind of, how would you say, normal kind of common sense, right?
Yes.
Natural in that sense, right?
Yes.
And the philosophy is unnatural in the sense that it goes against the common sense, right?
Yeah.
It goes in the opposite direction of what common sense tells you.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. This is the next point I want to go on to is a bit, well, it's kind of what we're talking about. It kind of goes back to the identity as a part, but every single person craves meaning in their life. Why does someone need, like, even for instance, for me with the podcast, I'll use me as an example. Like, I have a lot of hobbies and I love my hobbies, but if you told me you can only do your hobbies forever, would you be satisfied? I would say no, because that's not fulfilling my, like, what's my calling? What's my purpose here? Why do humans even feel that? Like, does the cow outside feel that, or is the cow just the cow? Not to make the cow just the cow, because I know you'll say there's more to it, but like, why is meaning? Why is that the most important thing to me? It's one of the most important things to me, and I would say to a lot of people. So I don't know if you have any why you think that.
I mean, it's I mean, I would bring that back to desire, actually.
Okay.
In the end, I mean, I I think it's and again, I mean, one of the things in the debates I'm kind of engaged in terms of philosophy of nature and stuff like that is all this question of human exceptionalism, you know. So, and there's a certain way of thinking that wants to say, you know, human beings are just like every other being, right? Where there's kind of called a flat ontology, where there's no kind of, you don't make these type of distinctions. Human being is not exceptional. They're just a kind of a natural being like any other.
Yeah.
And I want to say no. I mean, yes, the human being is entangled in the world in the way I've been describing, but there is something nonetheless different. And it goes down to the structure of desire, I think. We desire, like, I would make a distinction between desire and need, right? So, so I need something, I can fulfill it, right? I need food, I can fulfill it, and so on. But desire is something that never really gets fulfilled, right? The more I pursue it, the more it excessive it becomes, the more it grows, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what meaning is, right? Human beings are driven by a desire to make sense of themselves and the world around them, but we never reach that, right? We never reach that because there's, it's always, so to speak, there is no object in the world which will fulfill that. There is nothing which will give us, right? It's not like, you know, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, right? We're not going to get that formula, right? It's not going to give us that meaning.
Yeah.
And that's why, and in a certain sense, it's a good thing. That's a good thing because then we'd lose. Right?
What would we do when we get it?
Well, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a very interesting point. So then the thing of when people are saying, "Oh, I need to find meaning for my life. I need to find my purpose," is that nearly or is that nearly telling yourself the wrong thing? Because at what point? You know, at what point will you get there? You know, is that something? Is that nearly like a toxic way of telling yourself that you need to find something because you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself?
Yeah.
For something that you might never find.
Yeah. Well, I think it's kind of, I think it can be toxic for sure.
Yeah.
I think though it's necessary for us. I mean, I think we need that. We need something to strive for. We need something to and not strive for in the sense necessarily of achievement, because achievement is fickle, right? But it's like to something that will allow us to see why it is that we exist, why it is that the world is the way it is for us.
Yeah.
We need to answer that question. I think. And at very basic levels, right? I mean, we see this in terms of just the different concepts we work with, right? I mean, concepts like justice, for example, right? I mean, you know, we never, when somebody harms us in a way that is, we find negative, we see that as somehow unjust, right?
Yes.
Something's happened to us that not justified, that somehow an offense against us, right? There's an injustice being done to us, and that's not simply reacting, right? It's not simply I'm going to react against this harm being done to me. It's more than that. It's saying that there is something wrong in some kind of fundamental sense with what has happened.
Okay.
And that is an example of where we transcend the immediacy of what's happened, and we see it as having a wider meaning or a more fundamental meaning, right? So it's not just that this person, you know, I don't know, did whatever they did to me. That's not just that happened, but it's not. And see, it's interesting, the kind of the ambiguity of the word just here, right? It's not just, but there's an injustice, right? It's not only that it happened, but there's an injustice. Something has happened which has a meaning that transcends that situation. And as that's a negative in a sense of it, but it's nonetheless, that's a sense where what does that point to? It points to the fact that we're looking for that meaning, where we experience the world in terms of that meaning.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's very interesting. I think the next point I want to talk about is kind of social connection. I think we've talked about it at a certain point so far, and there's one thing that I want to talk about. I think people will call it a paradox, and I think to a certain point it is, if my definition of paradox is correct. But we're more connected than any generation in history, and somehow we're more disconnected than ever. How it feels anyways. How does that make sense? How have we now more avenues to connect with people than ever before, but now we're in a point where, definitely amongst my generation, we're not connecting as much as we used to? Why do you think that is the way this is manifesting itself?
I mean, you want to say it has to do with the medium of connection, I would think, right? I mean, because that seems that's kind of the issue, right? Isn't it? I mean, that the medium that's social media specifically seems to be one that connects us but doesn't connect us at the same time.
Yes.
You know. Part of that is, I guess, because it's, I mean, what connection means fundamentally, or no, put it a better way, necessary for connection is vulnerability.
Yes.
Right. I mean, an invulnerable being is not going to be connected with any other being. Right? Yes. So it's, in order to connect with another person, I have to be vulnerable to them in some way, right?
Yes.
Part of the problem with social media is that, I mean, it's ironic because in one way, social media makes us incredibly vulnerable, right? I mean, like, you know, I mean, it's like you know, the phenomenon of bullying, right? Where I mean, in my day, right, bullied at school, at least you went home and like that was, you know, whereas now it kind of follows you. So there's a certain sense which that vulnerability is, but it's kind of this vulnerability at that kind of toxic level, right? Yes. It's a vulnerability where you're vulnerable in the sense of being made purely passive towards this attack that you can't ward off. Whereas kind of a vulnerability in a kind of a healthy sense has to have necessarily a certain degree of mutuality, right? So I make myself vulnerable to another person who's making themselves vulnerable to me. Yes. And it comes back to this notion of trust, right? I have to trust in order for that to happen. And it seems to me that that require. I mean, I think I almost want to say we need an analog world for that to happen, right? You have to be, and it's in a certain sense got to do with embodiment, right? You have to be in an embodied relationship to the other person. You have to be there physically with them for that to happen. Yeah. I think part of the problem with social media is it disembodies us, right? Yes. And places us in that weird situation then where we're in one way invulnerable because we can, like, I can make a profile and say terrible things to somebody and
not tie to yourself, just
exactly. Yeah. And the flip side of that is make other people incredibly vulnerable because they can become subject to that. And
that's probably a skill that's being lost, because I always find that something, and if it's something I'm aware about myself, but I'm always willing to have a conversation with anyone that's willing to have a conversation with me. You know what I mean? And I feel like, and that's this right now, like I'm trusting you that you're going to want to talk about the things I'm going to talk about, and probably vice versa, you know? And like you're saying there with Instagram or social media or anything, okay, it's communication, but the means of getting from, I don't know if you could call it no communication to, okay, now we're communicating. It's not channeling the right habits or skills in order to do that. And as a result of that, I mean, like if that breeds a society then of people who aren't going to want to be vulnerable, well then that's kind of like nearly the activation energy you need to get to a good conversation. Right. You know, and then for instance, and we even talked about the case, and nowadays people aren't really having conversations. It's more so, you know, if it's a disagreement, it's a shouting match, or people are just giving out and things like that. And once again, that's because on social media, if I see something, or if you see something I post and you want to just comment anything out of nowhere, something terrible, you can just do it. And then that's kind of, it's nearly like the bad things of social media are bleeding into what was once a pure form of conversation. Yeah. So how is that going to continue to manifest itself? Like, how are the vulnerability issue, how is that going to be solved? Because I definitely think that, like, vulnerability, and specifically in Ireland, maybe that's even another point I could talk about, like being vulnerable as like an Irish man, you can say as an Irish woman too, but that's nearly, you know, even what I'm doing now, I feel like I'm being pretty vulnerable in what I'm doing with the podcast, you know, for instance. And there'll be lads that are going to be like, look at that dope, look what he's doing, you know what I mean? And I feel like now, obviously, in previous times that would happen too, but with social media, I feel like that's nearly, it's bleeding from that into it. So there's, is there any way forward with the phones? Like, will that just keep leading us to a point where we're going to be not socializing correctly? We're not going to be being vulnerable with each other. Is that what social media is? Social media taking away our ability to be vulnerable?
I think so. I mean, I don't see a way around that, really. I mean, I don't see how, but precisely because of the question of disembodiment, you know, because I think that, again, it's like we're embodied beings, right? And we engage with what is as
when you say that an embodied being, how would you define that? What do you mean by an embodied being? I want to make sure I'm understanding it.
I mean, what I mean is there's a distinction you can draw in German, which you can't really do in English the same way, unfortunately, between Leib and Körper in German. And basically, the way I like to think about this is a Körper. So let's say I'm in the hospital, and the Körper is this physical body, right? The doctor's there examining it, right? Okay. But once he says to me, "How do you feel?" Right? Now he's addressing me as a body, but he's not addressing me as that physical body, because why would he ask me that, right? He's got all the measurements. He's asking me how I am as an embodied being, how I'm experiencing the world as a body.
Yes.
And that involves physical pain, it involves emotions, it involves tactility, it involves perception, all of those things, right? So as that's what I mean by an embodied being. I'm at once this being that's experiencing the world and this being that is experienced. Right? Yes. So I can only experience the world to the extent to which I'm experienced by another being. And so my experience of the world necessarily makes me vulnerable, and makes me vulnerable in the sense that I am now in relation to other beings who are perceiving me, who have a certain affective response to me, right? A certain emotional response to me, whatever, right? We see that in things like shame. We see things like pride. We see in all these emotions, right, where they involve my experience of myself in relation to another person.
Yes.
Right? Like shame is a very good example of this, right? So I experience myself in another person. I experience them as having a negative view of me, right?
Yes.
And so I'm feeling my body both as my own and as that which another can perceive.
I think that kind of brings back to the self once again. Like you are only the sum of the relations that you have with other people. So, for instance, like even the whole thing of feeling embarrassed and feeling ashamed, like the only reason you're going to feel like that is because someone else has defined you as, that's how you feel. Yeah. Whereas, for instance, if I'm in a situation where, I don't know if this is a healthy way to look at it, but just be like, I don't care if someone thinks I'm doing a shameful thing. No, like obviously, there are some things that are probably like objectively bad, but like, just because I feel like a lot of people are scared to do things because they have to be vulnerable and they have to be, and they have to be, and maybe they are embarrassing themselves. Yeah. And that's probably something, again, we're losing. What's more, but I suppose, I think the vulnerability and the embarrassment thing is like even what I'm trying to do here now is train that, because, maybe what I want to do is on the other side of that. And if people aren't willing to do that, well, then maybe they're not, they're not going to find out maybe who they are, what the relations are going to be with other things, because they're not willing to try that. And even with all the possibilities we have now today to form relations with, we have social media, people, nature. Does more potentiality for relation, is that a good thing or a bad thing for trying to develop yourself? Or does it kind of just get diluted?
I don't think there's a yes no answer to that. I mean, it really depends on that, on what that relation is and how that relation is. I mean, there's and again, I mean, I think relationality goes all the way down, right? I'm in relation to the bacteria that's in my gut.
How deep do you want to go with it? It's infinite, probably. It is probably infinite.
So we're always in these relations, right? These relations are make up who we are, and And then on the kind of and that goes all the way up to kind of like a level of intimacy. Like obviously, like a level of intimacy, it's going to be we're not going to be relating with lots of people. Hopefully not. Anyway, so
that's a question I've got for you now. So we're going to get to that one.
But you know what I'm saying, right? I mean, there's degrees, right? But whereas like you relate to people on the street, you relate to people in all sorts of different contexts.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things we lose often is that capacity to relate in different ways, and to be willing and able to do that.
Yeah.
And you see that with interculturality, right? You see that it's kind of like you go into an ethnic food store, and you're in, and you see this, like, I'm just back from Canada, so you see this in Canada more than in Ireland, but in Ireland you get it too, right? You get some Polish stores or Middle Eastern stores, whatever, right? And then you're exposed to different foods, different words, different smells, and all of this, right? And that exploration is so important, right? That capacity to explore other ways of doing things, and then very kind of, as I say, the sense of smell, right? Different smells, different ways, different foods are going to give you the different sensations. That again, that's important for our development as human beings, I think, and so often we want to confine ourselves to simply that which we know, and we don't build up those habits. You talked about habits, which I think is a really key term here, right? Yeah. You have to build up the habit of being able to engage with that which is strange to you. Right? This
is great news, because this is what I'm trying to do right now, and if a philosopher's telling me this fine. But that's in a sense what I'm trying to do, because man, like I'm once again kind of like what I said about the whole embarrassment thing, like that's someone else, like me feeling embarrassed is because I think someone else would think I am, or is telling me I should be. But like really, like I can give, well, like maybe this is a too strong way of thinking about it. I choose to give as much power to that as I want. You know what I mean? The more power I give someone to make me feel bad because I should be embarrassed from what I'm doing, I'm probably not going to go out there and explore. But I think what you're saying there, the whole exploring thing and getting out there and just trying new things, experiencing new things, that's how you form perspectives on life. That's how you figure out who you might want to be. Like this is me forming another perspective now in a career maybe I might want to pursue. But if I'm too scared to do that, well then I'm never going to find out. Right. And what you're saying there about developing that habit, I mean, it's kind of great for me to hear, because obviously like this is what my family's told me to do, go out and see what you can find, but also hearing a philosopher say it too is like, come on, there must be some sort of thing in it there. The whole, I'm going to finish off at one point kind of on social connection and loneliness, and then I want to jump onto love and the whole thing you were saying there about, well, look, I'm not going to spoil it. We'll get into it, but one piece of advice for people to stop feeling as alone as they do nowadays, what would be a piece of advice you would give to someone if they're feeling alone, and not in the sense of the solitude where you were saying they're still related to other things and how people are thinking, but the one where they're cocooned and they feel like they're not in relation to anything and they just feel so nearly empty? What would be a piece of advice you might give to someone like that?
I'd be very slow to advise, and especially given that I'm not. So let me.
Maybe an opinion is a better word.
I don't want to talk in terms of advice because.
Maybe that's the wrong word.
Yeah, but in terms of what would my view of that, I think what's important is to recognize that. That relatability, being in relation to others, is necessary for human development. It's necessary for the development, for how people would develop.
Yeah.
But again, I'll quote because, as I say, it's not my expertise, but I'll quote my friend.
Given that credit.
I quote my friend Diane Enns, because she makes this point very strongly, that loneliness is not the responsibility of the person, right? The person is not responsible for being alone. The societal structures are responsible for loneliness, And that's one of the real kind of one of my bugbears in terms of, and you get it with say mindfulness, and I'm not hitting on mindfulness, but the way it's used, is like the problem is you. You need to fix yourself.
That's a great point.
You need to fix yourself. So
Yes.
if you're lonely, you need to fix yourself. I don't know. You've got all these social structures that are making people lonely. Let's try to change them. Let's try like don't put the onus on the individual.
Yeah. Yeah, I even feel like that's nowadays, and even kind of what I said about like the manosphere and the really like whatever political side they're on, probably like the far right. You know, it's all on you. You need to. And I suppose I made the point. Well, now maybe this is different because it's a career venture for me. I want to be accountable of who I can become, but to think that I'm not reliant on people around me would be completely crazy. You know, I am reliant on the people around me, but I think that's such an interesting point. And I heard someone recently saying like the reduction in third spaces since COVID. Third spaces being like places you can just go and socialize. Like obviously you have the pub and stuff, but maybe even youth clubs and things like that is just falling off a cliff, because COVID nearly changed us into even more of this isolated being. And maybe that was once again, now that's a whole different conversation. Do we need the level of isolation because of the virus? That's a completely different conversation that I don't even want to get into because that's just completely different. Sure. But once again, how can the political institutions try and institute something where we can stop people feeling lonely, because once again, I think that's a great point. Like people saying, oh, you're lonely, it's because of you. It's because it's because this trait, that trait, and the other trait. And then at a certain point, you'll have someone that's changing themselves and maybe they're not even being the person they want to be. And that might lead them to even being more lost. Once again, they're all my opinions and not, like you said, not advice, because what do I know? But like that's kind of the way I feel. I think it's a great point that, we need some sort of level ground where people can just come together again and just... and just socialize.
But we also need to be, you mentioned COVID, right? I mean, we need to be honest, right? And that's one of the things our political system needs to be honest, right? Like COVID, you talked about isolation, and like the mantra we're all in this together. Well, we weren't all in this together. We were out, and you've seen where we live here, like South Mayo. It's no hardship being a kind of walk in the roads, country roads here. It's not isolation in the sense it is if you're in a flat with a bunch of kids and very little capacity to go outdoors,
free space
or whatever. That's a different story. So let's be honest with people, right? We're, like in that type of situation, we're not in this together. And let's try to go towards a situation where we are in this together.
Could not agree with you anymore.
And again, in terms of loneliness, it's a similar thing, right? I mean, it's society. The social structures are ones that make certain people more vulnerable than others in this respect. And the lack of mental health in Ireland, particularly the lack of mental health supports in this respect. Again, I really think it's that's the crucial thing here, is to recognize it's like asking somebody who's somebody who's drowning, just learn to swim. Just learn to swim. It's like, well, no, I mean, you're drowning.
That's quite not the situation that's taking place. I think it's a great point. And the political institutions are trying to come in and make something more, make it so you don't drown or you don't get in the situation where you're even drowning to start with. I think it's great, and it's a great point. The next point I want to talk about is everything kind of just to do with love. Okay. So, do you believe love is closer to a feeling or a type of faith that you would have in something?
I think it's both. I mean, I think it's certainly a feeling, but it's a way of approaching another. Right? I think. I mean, the word approach is interesting, right? It comes from the French kind of nearness, right? It's a relation to near, coming near to another, and I mean, it's a feeling for sure, and again, it depends on what kind of love we're talking about, right? I mean, it's like you think about, like, the interesting thing about love is. There's probably not anything you could mention that there's not somebody out there who loves it, right? I mean, love is like one of these kind of ubiquitous kind of things, right? There's people of all sorts of things, right? And then, of course, we need to distinguish between types of loves, right?
That's even what I was going to ask you, like the romantic partner.
Right.
my family, I love my family, but you love a romantic partner in a different way.
Yeah.
How does that make sense?
Well, I mean, the Greeks had different words, right? When they were describing these things, right? I mean, they had at least 3 words for love, right? Eros, philia, and agape, so there's a certain sense in which the word love is doing a lot of heavy lifting here, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of talking about or referring to, in a way, very different things.
Yes.
But I think what binds them together is a number of things. I mean, one is a kind of partiality, right?
Okay.
So if you love somebody, you're not indifferent to them, and you're not treating them like any other, right? You're partial to that person or that thing or whatever. So that commitment. I mean, that love you commit to another person, and remember, I mean, the thing about love, right, is love doesn't have to be reciprocated, right? You know, so you can commit yourself, you can commit your life to somebody who you know doesn't really care for you. Right?
And I'd say there's a lot of people who've done that one.
Yeah, no, exactly, and but that's still. I mean, people would argue, is that love or not? I think it is. I think there's. I mean, of course, there's distinguish between infatuation and love, you know.
Yes.
But I think you can genuinely feel love for somebody who doesn't return that, and that's one of the tragedies in human life, right?
Is that good? Is that a good thing to love someone that doesn't love you?
Well, no, it's not a good thing.
Yeah.
But you know, it's kind of, in a certain sense, we don't necessarily have control over these things, right? I mean, it's not by accident that we talk about falling in love, right?
That's true. You don't choose; it just happens.
Yeah.
But then, I find that so interesting. Like like if you do fall in love with someone that doesn't love you back, then why is it so tough to kind of let go of that? Why is it so tough to accept the fact that maybe they don't love us the way we love them? You know, how does that? And then we just continue to love them anyways, or it's hard to walk away from them. Why is that?
Well, it comes back to the question of meaning you talked about earlier, right? I mean, that if you love someone, they become a certain kind of fulcrum of meaning for you, right?
Okay.
They become that around which you build the meaning of your life. Now, this can get pathological very quickly, right? Clearly,
yes.
right?
Yes.
But the important point, I think, is that love is that sense that another is not just significant, but kind of significant in a fundamental way to your life, right? And the reason why I talk about unreciprocated love is because, again, that's a risk, right? There's something dangerous about love, right? And we place ourselves in that, and we are placed in that danger when we love somebody. And also, I mean, you think about romantic love, but also, I mean, in a way, there's no more dangerous love than loving a child, right? Because you know you've got somebody in the world who's, you know, hopefully going to go out on their own, and it's gonna come a stage where you can no longer protect them, but you still love them deeply. I mean, but they're kind of, you have to allow, you know, we have to let them go, right? That's a huge risk for any person.
I might. This is probably going to change it up a bit here now, but I gotta ask you what your opinion on dating apps and things are like. Tinder, Hinge, any of them kind of things.
I have basically no opinion on them at all. I don't think. I don't know. Again, that's a generational thing, right? They went around in my day. You had to kind of, you know, screw up your courage and go up and ask somebody, you know.
But is that important though? You know, are we losing that sense once again, that ability to be vulnerable? She might call me weird, she might call me stupid, but I still got to do it, or else I'm never going to get out at this point, you know. Whereas now with the dating apps, it's just as simple as I'll just swipe right or swipe left.
No, I know.
But then again, a lot of people are meeting their significant others on that, you know. So
I'd be reluctant to kind of be too hard on it, because I mean, some really good relationships come out of that.
Maybe it's just a thing like you kind of said before, like you can just take it at face value and just be like, it just is what it is, and if you want to use them, fine. If you don't want to use them,
Yeah. It's so outside my experience. I really don't know what to say.
Hey, I just said I'd ask. I gotta ask, and because the reason I wanted to ask was kind of, I feel like that whole side of dating apps and stuff, it's kind of more, and I suppose when you go up to a girl, if you're gonna ask her on a date or anything like that, there's a certain level of desire there. But I feel like the dating apps of nowadays, it's like everything is based on just a desire for how something looks, and I suppose that's kind of more so the point I wanted to get into with that, the follow up to that. So I don't know, do you have any opinions on that? Like, you have maybe desire on one side, and then maybe like, I don't know, on the other side, like a selflessness, for instance. Like I love that, like, let's say your parents love you selflessly. Now granted, like, well then again, if you like, now I have no experience of this because I don't have a wife, but if I did have a wife, I'd probably love her selflessly too, as much as I might desire her. So how does that, are we kind of losing balance between, like, if it's just all desire nowadays and short-term gratification?
I mean it's an interesting question, right? Because the thing about love, it's taking specifically romantic love, is that it's singular, right? It's got to do with a singular person, right? And in terms of dating apps, I guess one of the issues in dating apps is, right, that you put forward a kind of like an image of yourself, right, that may or may not be true, but it's also kind of geared into all these boxes, right? It's kind of what I started with, like saying, that myself is not all these categories that I could put me on, right? So if I was going on a dating app, I'd put all these categories down, right? I'd say all these things about myself, right? But that's not me, right? And that's the problem, right? And so, and that's what happens, like when you, but it's one of those interesting things in human relations, right? So you see somebody, and not just romantically, right? Generally, you see somebody and you get an impression of them because of their physical appearance, right?
This is literally the exact way I feel about this. I'm so happy that you're talking about this right now.
Yeah. So, but you get an impression, right? And that either draws you in or it doesn't, right? And if it draws you in, then that's the first step, but it's certainly not the last step, right? And so so what's happening in the end? In the end, you're getting to know somebody in the singularity of their being, right? And that's what's so amazing about life, is that each of us has yes, we're relational in all the way I described, but we're also singular, right? There's no other person like you in the world. There's no other person like me in the world, right? And when you fall in love with somebody, you're falling in love with that individual person, right? And in the singularity of their being, and that happens through, yes, kind of the portal, the gateway into that is their appearance or their sense of humor or whatever, right? But that leads you down to who that person is, and there's something in that person that you value, and that you and not only value, and it's a dynamic type of thing, right? Because that person isn't just the singular person who are there now; it's their trajectory of life. It's their future is what you're falling in love with as much as their present. You're falling in love with who they are becoming, and hopefully they're falling in love with who you're becoming.
Yeah, like,
right?
let's hope, like, that would be quite a bad situation. And when you said that there, when you're talking about, it's kind of like a portal into the person, you fill out all these categories and you kind of show who you are. And this is something I struggle with so much, and it's the main reason why I don't use the dating apps, is because I'm seeing your perfect version of you that you would like to be, but I don't know if that's you.
Right.
And then the thing is, I'll see that and then I'll extrapolate, like you said, because I'm falling in love with their future. It's literally exactly what you're saying. Because I extrapolate then and say, oh, well, that means they're going to be this way and they're going to be that way, and then before you know it, I get to know the person. I'm like, well, you're not the person I made you out to be, which is not your fault at all, but it's mine for seeing it like that. And that's something I find that I struggle with so much, and that's why I wanted to ask you, because that's something, like, that's why I just can't use them. And I know there's a lot of people out there that won't see that the same way as me, and they won't look into it the same way I do, but just the way I am, that's the way I do it. So I just can't use them. But I was curious to see what your opinion on it was. So I mean, that kind of feels, it's a bit of a win for me there.
Right.
You know what I mean?
But you know what? I mean, I think like dating apps kind of puts that in the extreme way. But in a certain sense, it's only making extreme what's already there, right? Because anybody you meet, you see them in terms of the possible future that they are.
Of course.
Right? And so it's kind of, and I think part of the problem, and what you said there is exactly right? So that you when you impose that future on them, that's the problem, and a lot of the kind of in the way in which, again, just to kind of not wishing to use a kind of a buzzword, but thinking about patriarchal society. One of the ways patriarchal society worked was that it understood women in a very stereotypical way. And then what that meant was, like, as if you wanted to marry a certain woman, you wanted her to fulfill a certain stereotypical
so one-dimensional
trajectory. Exactly.
Yeah.
And then and the problem with that, of course, is you're missing the fact that, well, she's not a woman, kind of, she's her, right? She's this
far
one
more,
person. Exactly.
Far more than just she's a person. Yeah.
Just the woman as patriarchy has kind of defined her.
Yes.
And so that's again is kind of like, I think, looking at it from a male point of view, I think that's one of the problems. And something you talk about relationality, right? We've been produced out of that patriarchal society, whether we like it or not, right? That's what's produced us. And that's what we have to come to terms with, right? Is to try to kind of not fall into those kind of traps of projecting on, and specifically onto women, a kind of a stereotype.
This is who you should be.
Yeah, that comes out of a purely male kind of image and male desire.
Do you think that works both ways, though? Do you think that, let's say, women are projecting a certain version of what a man should be onto a man as well?
Oh yeah, well this is the problem with patriarchy, right? In a certain sense, patriarchy is as damaging to men as to women, right? Because
man, who decided the patriarchy? It's not just men and women. Who else is out there? Maybe that's proof that the aliens are real. Is they're turning us against each other? It makes no sense.
Yeah, but you see, this is it. I mean, this is what I talk about, trying to think the world again in a new way. I mean, it's like we face issues, we face situations, and we develop our society to kind of deal with those, and to and again, not determinately, right? There's a certain way in which we have responded, and that's patriarchy is a certain way of responding to something like family, right? I mean, because the inheritance and keeping possession, right? That all kind of tied into the male as the head of the house. It's funny, I don't know if you remember not so long ago that the 2026 census was up on the. I don't know if you went into.
No, I didn't. I'm going to be honest.
But I went back to my father, so my grandparents in Limerick, and it's so weird to see, like, head of the house. Relation to the head of the house, right? Your
relation to that, what does that even mean?
Yeah,
that's a crazy.
Oh, but the head of the house was the man,
but
right?
That's crazy to think of, because when you make the point of we're, and it's, I know I always think of it too, but I'm always told at the patriarch, everyone is a person.
Yeah.
Not the head of the house, and it's just that everyone's their own person. We're all just people. There's males, there's females.
Yeah.
We're all just people.
Yeah. But anyway, so it was just I found it so. I mean, I knew that was there, but just to see it in black and white, right? And it was like there was no option, husband of head of the house, right? That didn't happen. Right? It was wife of, whatever,
Yeah, go on, separate.
So it was interesting. But anyway, so that I mean, no, I think absolutely those stereotypes work both ways, and again, I mean, I think but again, in healthy relationships they break down, right? I mean, so maybe you might go into a relationship with that idea, but
yes.
if you're faced with a singular human being, if you're vulnerable to that person, if you're open to that person, that's what love true is, right? It's that openness, that opening to another person.
Yes.
At a kind of a very fundamental level, right? Because to the extent to which you're kind of getting to know the singular person of the other person, they're getting to know you, and that's a scary thing, right? Because yes, it's lovely to be the singular being, but on the other hand, it's like, golly, I mean, is it really necessary to see the world like I see the world, right? I mean, is it like, is this kind of, in the end, it's a kind of a scary thing, because to be a singular human being means that there is really no model for who I or you are, right? There's models out there that we engage with all the time, but in terms of who you are, who I am, there's no model out there. Right?
Yeah.
We have to make that up as we go along.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy because I always, like, something that I always kind of try and tell myself is, well, and maybe I shouldn't think this way, but it's like, you know, who are you going to be, in the sense of, you know, it's up to you, you know, but maybe, like you're saying, at a certain point as well, like, there is so much more of your environment that is taking place. It's not just, is that a good attitude to have, to try and think that I am going to decide who I'm going to be, in a sense that, you know, I want to become maybe the best person I can be. I don't know the correct words, but I want to become as good as I can become. Is that nearly a bad way to think about it, that it's like completely up to me to be as good as I can? Or is it more so your environment, choose good people, all that kind of stuff? That's a bit separate to love now, but it's just something that popped to my mind.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, you know, going back to the old Greek idea, like living a good life, right? That's kind of what it's about as a human being, right? Is to try to live the best life we can do. And I think that, absolutely, I think that's the goal, right? I mean, but the goal, again, as Aristotle makes very clear, right? It's a goal that we only do in relation to others. You know, we need other people in doing that, right?
Yeah, maybe I need to change my map of it's not all up to me, because then there's a lot of pressure with that too, you know. You're telling myself, oh, it's all on me, it's like the self-help or the mindfulness. You need to change you.
Right.
That's something, I'm definitely going to think about. I'll pivot back to love, because I don't want to go too far off topic, but there's something kind of like centric to love, and I hope this isn't too much of a, well, I personally don't believe it to be an uncomfortable topic. I hope it's not, but the whole topic of like sex and promiscuity, do you believe that sex should be something that's, you know, rooted in a relationship or in a loving relationship, or do you think there's anything that's maybe pathogenic by sleeping around with many people? I know it's the thing of everyone can choose to do what they want to do on their own, and that's 100% the camp I'm in, but I'm just curious on your opinion. Do you think that like sex is something sacred for a loving relationship, or is it something that can just be with maybe just whoever you like?
I mean, I think it's always a mistake in thinking about being human to separate the physical from the emotional and the spiritual. Right?
Okay. Yes.
I think that's true about food as much as it's true about sex, right? And so for all human kind of engagement, I think all of those aspects are in play, you know. And so what that means in terms of the specifics of a person's life is another question, but I think
it's person by person,
But I think you need let's put it this way. I mean, I think certainly, sex and love are different things, right? I mean, for sure, right? And obviously you can have sex outside of love, right? You can have love without sex, right? Even romantic love without sex. Right?
That's true. Once again, love is bearing a heavy weight. Just that one word is bearing a heavy weight.
So it's certainly. Certainly these are distinct, even if they're related. But in terms of promiscuity, again, I don't have a lot I can say about that. I don't think. But only to say that again. More kind of from my point of view, just to recognize that everything, especially something like sex, things we do are expressions of ourselves, right? And that's, in all our lives, no matter what we're doing, we need to take that into account. Right? We need to take into account that what we're doing is expressing us. And the way sometimes the way what we try to kind of compartmentalize our lives, I think is really kind of negative, where you kind of say, no, this isn't expressing me, this is just, whatever. This is just physical or whatever. I think that's kind of delusional.
Yeah, you can't just completely segregate, like maybe like I'm saying, the mental, the spiritual, the physical, it's all kind of something that's
all intertwined.
It's not, you're not just doing it in one sense, you're doing it in all the senses, whether you like it or not. Okay, I feel like that's kind of, that's a great answer. That's kind of what I kind of would have had an idea for. That's kind of it on love. That's all I really wanted to talk about. The next topic is kind of going maybe the complete opposite spectrum is violence. So and the main thing I find interesting, and maybe this is more of a biological point, but I'm interested in your perspective too. I think it's safe to say people love violence at the right time, but they hate it at the wrong time. So trying to figure out, is there ever actually a moment where, you know, is violence in itself objectively good or bad in that sense then? Because, like, even for instance, I like, would you agree on the premise that people do maybe not love violence, but they accept violence in the right situation, but they hate violence in the wrong? Does that hit home with you?
And in a right situation, what do you mean?
A right situation, someone tried to hurt my mother, let's say.
Okay, so self-defense type, for example.
Something, yeah completely, like a defense term, not like just going out and, you know, the wrong sense then in that instance would be like, I just hit someone for no reason. Just because I can. Right. That would be the bad. Right. So is that, like, philosophically, how would you kind of unpack that? Why is violence kind of accepted in one sense, but not accepted in another sense?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Well, I mean, I guess I want to go back to thinking about what we mean by violence in the first place, right?
You have to define it first to know. Because there's many types of violence as well, you know. We could even go into that discussion then too. You know?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a strong sense in which I think the kind of hearing the word violation and violence is useful. Right.
Okay.
That violence is in some way violating, and I think that's true even in self-defense, right? I mean, there's a certain way in which you're violating another person in self-defense, and so what I mean by that is, I mean, that you can see that in different ways, but it's like that there's, you can think about that in terms of boundaries, right? The person has certain boundaries, maybe and they're not just physical, which you are invading in some way when you engage in violence on them. And then the question is, you know, well, is that sometimes justified, or how would that be justified, or whatever? I mean, I think I think the first thing to say is that one has to recognize that violation is taking place. So even if you feel yourself totally justified in having, you know, engaged in violence against the person, it's still important to recognize that you've engaged in violence. You've violated that person in some way, even though you had a good reason for doing so, or you think you had a good reason for doing so.
Yes.
You know, and
why is it important to do that? Is that so you don't continue to do it? So, for instance, if you don't actually consciously think, "Oh, I've just violated someone," you will just do it again.
Well, I think it's that's kind of, I think that's kind of the answer. I think it's because I think violence has a kind of a dynamic of its own. Okay. Right. We try to control it in rational terms. We try to control it in terms of how we justify it, but I think it's almost like a virus, right? Violence kind of works almost like a virus. It kind of like gets into you and becomes kind of hard to get rid of. Hard to remove. Yeah. And that's why we say in terms of the political violence, right? It's like it always. I mean, there's some times where you might be able to justify it. I think there are times where I think that it's justifiable. Okay. But you always have to recognize that you're unleashing something. Yeah. Like you're unleashing something that you may not be able to control. Yes. You know.
With and even just spinning off a point you made there about political violence, and somehow in some instances it can be acceptable. I do agree with that. But who draws the line in that situation? And why I say I agree with that is because, for instance, if you have someone like Hitler, for instance, you know, is political violence to try and remove him, is that acceptable? And then the point becomes, well, who draws the line of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable political violence? Because at the end of the day, politics is put in place so people can hash out their I don't know exactly what the word, a democratic process, let's say, rather than just saying, I don't like you, so I'm going to hurt you.
Right.
So who draws the line then with what violence is accepted and in what situations are accepted? Because, well, I don't want to start giving my opinion on political violence because I don't really know if I can. Like the Hitler comparison I'm making, that's the first one that comes to mind. Like how many terrible atrocities did he partake in? But who decides then it's okay to remove this person by act of political violence, and then it's not acceptable on the other side for this person to remove through political violence? Who draws that line?
I don't think anybody draws the line. I don't think it's a line that can be drawn in the end. I mean, I think it's a matter of judgment.
Okay.
And judgment is one of those things which is, first of all, it's situational.
Yes.
It requires wisdom. It requires a degree of wisdom.
Yeah.
And it's uncertain, you know.
Yes.
And so there's different things I think that go into it, right? I mean, one thing is its necessity, the judgment as to whether it's necessary or not.
Yes.
And I think that's the problem here, is that it's much easier to make that judgment of its non-necessity when you're outside the situation, right?
Yes.
When you're in the situation, it can appear, now sometimes falsely, but it can appear to be the only solution. And
yes.
And the reason why is because one of the problems when we talk about political violence is we kind of say, we point to those engaged in political violence, and we don't see the violence that they're responding to, right? And the thing about regimes that are oppressive, their oppression is, generally speaking, one that operates without overt violence. Now, there's some overt violence for sure, but for the most part, it's not overt. And that's where, like Hannah, again, if I quote Hannah Arendt, she talks about how the end of the Nazi regime was evident in the overt violence, where like they literally went around stringing people up in Berlin in 1944. Right?
Yes.
They weren't doing that in 1936. Right? They weren't stringing people up. They were, of course, they were putting people in concentration camps, right?
Yes.
But you could walk down the street as a normal German, right? as the good German, without fear, right? For the most part, right?
Yes.
That's what we have to recognize, right? That it's not the overt violence. It's the way in which structurally the regime is possibly systematically discriminating against you. Is systematically engaged in injustice against you and your community, and so on. And there can come a stage where, if for those involved in those situations, there seems only one of two possibilities: either that you simply accept your role as this oppressed second-class citizen or whatever it is, or you engage in violence against it, you know, and I think, you know, and I don't think there's any template, right? There's not a template. You can't come in with a template and say, okay, this and this. You tick these boxes. You can go ahead.
This is right. You can do it here. Yeah. Once again, like, it's not kind of like the whole point that you've been making is that things aren't necessarily as simple as they might seem.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. And but it needs wisdom and judgment, and you know, it's and sometimes that's lacking, sometimes it's not, but you know, it's
like wisdom and judgment when like hate and rage is boiling in your blood. I feel like that's something that, you know, wisdom and knowledge is like, that goes out the window nearly, you know what I mean? But
the good, like there that's true, but I think you do see, if you look at, you know, particular situations, South Africa could be an example, where, you know, you you actually do see leaders who aren't driven by rage or hatred, but are able to kind of make a judgment within a situation, and that's true leadership. And it may be rare, but we do see it.
Yeah. Going then, that's kind of political violence. I want to talk about religion in a certain sense in relation to violence. Not that religion's main goal is to take us away from violence, but maybe bring us to a more peaceful state of being. I can't really speak exactly what religion is trying to get anyone to become, because like I said, I feel quite spiritually homeless. I haven't really engaged with my faith in Christianity or anything like that. Something I want to figure out more. But a lot of the times I find that religion, while its cornerstone is non-violent, maybe, let's say, but there's a lot of religious violence. So is this, in your opinion, is this something that is, is just the people are committing the violence, or is it the people through the religion are committing the violence? Because are people just being violent and they need an excuse, so they're using religion as a vessel, or are they themselves, is religion itself something that is kind of violent in some ways?
Yeah, I mean that's a really complex question, right? And I don't think there's a simple answer to it.
Yes.
I think one of the issues with religion, and again, it depends what religion we're talking about in many ways. But the religion I know most about is Christianity. And what's ironic about Christianity is that if you look at the Gospels, they're kind of not a prototype. They're kind of setting out a really radically non-violent position, right?
Yeah.
And I don't mean I don't just mean in the sense of pacifism. I mean in the sense, the key kind of parables is the Good Samaritan parable, and the point of the Good Samaritan, the fundamental point of the Good Samaritan parable, is that the division between Samaritan and Jew doesn't matter. What matters is compassion for the other person, right? And so, in other words, the battle lines are being negated right from the beginning, right? Those battle lines are ones that need to be suspended in compassion for the suffering of another. That's kind of one of the fundamental, I think, and I think fundamentally radical messages of Christianity. But right, so the problem, there's a couple of problems that arise from that. One is that we hear it in the very word gospel. It becomes understood as the truth that needs to be defended, right?
Yes.
And so then you get the ironic, paradoxical situation where you use violence in order to defend that truth that is non-violent.
That's non-violent.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just fundamentally paradoxical.
Yeah.
But it happens all the time, right?
Yes.
And so it's kind of like it's both the case. It's both the case that and I think you can draw similar things in Islam as well, as far as I understand Islam, and certainly in Judaism.
Yes.
You can on the one hand, and it's not kind of ungenuine. It's totally genuine. It's actually the core idea of peace and love. But then it becomes necessary, understood as necessary, to defend that truth against those who are unbelieving
or threatening,
who are threatening or whatever, right? And that works in a number of ways, but certainly in Christianity institutionally, right, where an institution is built around this, and then that institution has to defend itself.
Is that nearly a sense of, trying to say that Christianity, for instance, let's say someone is defending Christianity and they're going to violent measures to defend Christianity. because someone else has a different opinion on what they're talking about. Is that nearly a sense of, why can't that simply just be accepted? You know, like, now, once again, I'm not the guy to speak about what Jesus wanted for us, because I'm not, I am a Christian, but I don't know enough about Christianity. But, you know, I would doubt that Jesus would want us to harm other people because they don't believe the same thing as us. I mean, Jesus died on the cross for us. So, like, why would people, and I know this mightn't be a question that you can answer, but why would people then do what Jesus more or less made explicit for them not to do, to be violent?
I know.
So is that the human condition, and how it relates then to religion? And violence, maybe.
I think, well, specifically in Christianity, it's tricky, right? Because there's a certain sense in which the Christian message is antithetical to institutions.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a certain paradox, or if not contradiction, already in the idea of institutionalized Christianity, right? Which isn't accidental, by the way, because the you know, it's very clear from the Gospel, it's clear from Paul's letters that the early Christians thought the end of the world was coming, right? It's not that it was coming in 1,000 years. No, it was coming in their lifetime, right? And by the end of the world, what they meant, they didn't mean that everybody was dying, going to heaven. They meant that the world would be transformed. It would be a new heaven and new earth.
Yeah.
Their world was going to be transformed into a world of peace and justice, right? That was going to happen. The Christ was going to come back, and that was going to happen.
Yeah.
So when that doesn't happen, what you get is a message being transmitted institutionally, right? And then that message, of course, is a very important one, a very significant one.
Yes.
And it's kind of the flip side of love, right? I mean, if you love it enough, you're going to be fiercely defensive in relation to
that's
it. And
very true.
then you're going to, you know, and then, you know, it's not a big leap then to violence.
To violence.
In order to protect the institution that itself understands itself to be, you know, protecting this truth. And the problem is that is understanding this kind of the gospel, literally, as this kind of truth that needs to be maintained, as opposed to a challenge to live a certain way. Right? And that's, I mean, one of my favorite quotes from Nietzsche is that there was only one Christian and he died on the cross, right?
That is such a Nietzsche quote.
Yeah, no, exactly. But
such a Nietzsche quote.
But I think it's absolutely right. I mean, I think if you take the Christian message seriously, you take seriously what Christ said.
Yeah.
Nobody has lived up to
Nobody's
that, right?
That.
And that's that strange kind of criteria thing, right? You've got priests and bishops and so on. Who are dedicating their life to Christ, but I think in their heart of hearts would also admit that they've never actually lived up to that. And I'm not saying that as a criticism. I'm saying it's such an extraordinarily radical idea of how to live our lives that's impossible to live up to. But I think it's actually, I think that doesn't mean it shouldn't be striven for. I think actually it's something that the one should strive for.
I agree.
You know, but anyway, that sets us in this very paradoxical situation, right? And so I think that's part of the reasoning. Yeah. I think part of it also, in more kind of contemporary terms, is that, and this maybe has to do more with Islamic violence, but I think also to do with violence from the right wing in you know, say homophobic violence, for example, in the States, and all sorts of violence that's kind of in the name of Christianity in the States, and not just in the States, but is that religion finds itself in a very difficult situation in the contemporary world, because its religion has been put to the kind of the margins of society, right? And then when it tries to affirm itself, there is really very little avenue. When we talked about discourse, there is very little place for that, right? So if you we see it in Ireland, but we see it more generally. Like it's very difficult to come into public discussion from a religious point of view today, right? Because it's immediately kind of rejected and denied as being somehow illegitimate, right? The very starting point is illegitimate, right? It's kind of like, well, that's fine for your private views, but you can't bring that in.
That's not.
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, it's a controversial view, but I think it's, I think that, again, I think that's the legacy of modernity. It's the legacy of the kind of the division of church and state. Mm-hmm. I think, again, I think needs to be rethought. Not in the medieval sense, not in the sense that the church should have a political role again, not in that sense. But in the sense that religion, I think the religious kind of traditions, religious ideas have something to tell us about our contemporary world, which I think would be challenging in a good way to the kind of the framework we're living in today. Yes. And when you and so I think a way to kind of push against religious violence is actually, ironically enough, to be more open to religion, including to Islam. I mean, I think Islam has a lot to tell us. And but if you tell people no, we're just going to push you to one side, then it's
But that's even the thing. If you try and defend something, so no, we don't want that. We don't want like that. That's in itself. You're going to defend it with violence, Whereas if you were just more open, maybe that wouldn't be the violence. Wouldn't be the end stake. What's your relationship with time, and how has that changed over the course of your life?
Golly, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, there's the obvious, right? Where when you're young, it seems like time is just endless, right?
That's where I am. That's what I feel like.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you get to my age, I mean, it doesn't seem so anymore. So that for sure. I think the thing about time is that time is, I mean, it's the structure of experience, right? It's how we experience. But it's also the quality of that experience, right? So when you simple thing like when you're bored, time seems to stretch out forever, right? If you're in a boring lecture or whatever, it's going on forever.
The watch pot.
Yeah, exactly. But other times, like, it's like go so fast, right? If you're enjoying it, it's just going so fast.
Yeah.
And so there's that, and that's got to do. I mean, what that indicates, I think, is that time is. We make a mistake when we think about time purely in terms of clocks, right? In terms of time is. It's not that clock time isn't important, but of course it is. I mean, we wouldn't be able to make our appointment for this if we didn't have clock time, right? But the experience, the human experience of time, is much deeper and much richer than that. And fundamentally, it's got to do with this kind of way in which we're Janus-facing beings, right? We're both facing the past and the future at once. Right, and how the future appears to us is influence how the past is for us, and vice versa. And so, I mean, one way philosophers have thought about this is to think of it in terms of narrative. Right, the time has got a narrative structure. So, in other words, we're forever making and telling our own story. Right. And it's got a beginning, it's got a kind of it's got a source, and then it's got a certain logic, certain kind of trajectory, certain plot, if you like. It's messy, it's all sorts of kind of dead ends and all sorts of things, but it has a certain coherence for us, And of course, this is one of the terrible things with something like dementia, where that seems to get lost, right? Where that sense of, but it's interesting with dementia that what certain things don't get lost. For example, music, and music is interesting because music is the kind of the art form that really works on time, if you like, right? Without time, there's no music, right?
Beats per minute and how fast the song is. Exactly. Everything working together to stay on time. Exactly. If it's not on time, it sounds terrible.
Yeah, well, that for sure. But also, it's never present at once, right? You can take a painting and it's there, right? But music isn't.
Very
right?
interesting. Yeah.
It needs the melody needs time in order to develop but what's so interesting about it is that we somehow hold it, right? We manage, like you listen to a melody, you're holding on to what went before and you're anticipating what's coming, right? That's how you listen, how you hear a melody. So I think it's interesting that the dementia patients that the music it's that kind of, it's yes kind of that very bodily rhythmic sense of music that's still there for them, but also that sense of time is still there, right? That sense of time as this kind of this development that somehow we manage to kind of hold things together at once, and that's what makes up a self, right? I mean, the self, like if I didn't have the past and I didn't have the future, I wouldn't be as a self. Right?
Yes.
I need both, right, to hold me together. So that's kind of, and it's interesting. I mean, you talk about time. I mean, time, like philosophically, in terms of my work. I mean, I've done a lot of work on time, and we talked about different words for love. And in the Greeks, they have a number of words for time, but two of them that are particularly pertinent to my work are Chronos and kairos. And Chronos we get chronology from, and kairos, this really interesting word. It's kind of like it's got to do with a moment, right? It's a moment that's significant. Right, and it's interesting. Think about our memories, right? Like in the last week, countless things happened to me. Without a huge effort, I wouldn't be able to remember most of them, right? But certain things stand out, right? Certain qualitatively distinct moments, and in the sense that think about our if you're somebody giving a eulogy to somebody, right? That's what they talk about, right? They talk about certain underlying qualities that tied them all together, but they also about these kind of unique moments, these moments that kind of, if you like, express the person in a particular way, and so that I think is when we think about time, it's like how I think what's important is that those moments that kind of where past and future kind of come together for us in a really, in a moment which kind of, you talked about meaning, how is meaningful for us. It kind of says, okay, this is what my life is about. It's somehow indicating what my life is, expressing what my life is about.
Even when I did just some research into you, I found that one, the Greek words, I'm not going to even try and pronounce them, but I saw that you were talking about time in a sense that, there's some time that just passes, and that's the time that you don't necessarily remember. It just passes and it just is. And then there is times that actually do matter. And I suppose one thing I kind of wanted to ask you about, nowadays it feels like there's nearly a productivity... There's like a productivity curse or a problem in the sense that everyone needs to be doing something that matters at every single time. And how does that affect your relationship then with time? Because if you always think everything has to be mattering, it just feels like time's just slipping away, and you don't have the outputs to show for the time you've spent. So how important is the time that just passes? The time you don't think about it, it just moves. You don't remember it, but how important actually is that?
I think it is. I think it is important. So it's not that, I mean, the qualitative moments have significance, but they wouldn't be but for those kind of, as you say, that passing, that flowing, right? And time flows. I mean, and it passes. And what's interesting about that is that in a way, well, first of all, we can't do anything about it. We can't stop it. And also, it's flowing to an inevitable end, right? And everything, everything you talked about productivity, everything we produce, all those things that matter, they'll probably not matter long before we die, and they certainly, after we die, probably most of them, all of them, won't matter, right? So it's like, we I think. To be cognizant of that, right? That flow of time is a flowing away, means that nothing is permanent for us, right? But also I think that to recognize that it's not that impermanence doesn't make them unimportant. simply means that, again, come back to the notion of relationality, it simply means that everything is, that everything that happens has to be understood in terms of its relation to a flow of time in which we find ourselves.
Yeah. So then, leading to the points of time that actually matter, let's say they're let's say they're the ones we find and we remember the most. In order for those times to be important, how important is death and the finality of life to have moments that actually matter? Because, like, I don't know if you see much of this now, but there's people talking about they're trying to develop like a pill or some sort of anti-aging device or tool. But, you know, is that the answer? And to me, it probably isn't, because if you have like an unlimited amount of time, then why would anything matter?
Right.
You know, so why do we want? And then once again, I don't think you have the answer here per se, but I'm interested in your opinion on, you know, why do humans we just want more time? We want more time. We want more time, rather than just be grateful for the time you've been given and take advantage of now. Take advantage of the moment you have. Why do we always want more? Is that coming back to kind of what we talked about at the start about totalitarianism, and we're trying to get as many resources as possible, so now we want as much time as possible? What is that human condition for more, and specifically in a time manner, because we could get into it in other ways.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's necessarily, I mean, yes, it is, we're looking for more time, but I think it's probably more fundamentally got to do with the lack of control that mortality points to, right? That we you know, that we're the thing about birth and death is it's something that happens to us as we don't do it, right? And so it's a real, like, the limit, it shows the fundamental limits of our control, of our power, of our action, of our activity. So I think that's, you know, I think that's kind of a key here, you know. And so yes, more time, but crucially, it's looking for, like in the most extreme cases, it's looking for immortal time, right? There's a lot of the kind of the post-humanist, I think it's more kind of transhumanist ideas of trying to upload ourselves onto the cloud or whatever, right?
I don't know who said it, but I heard someone saying that the future humans is some sort of, like you said, transhuman.
Yeah, and like I mean, there's certain sense in which I think that's not necessarily too problematic, right? I mean, in the sense that that some sort of technology becomes incorporated into our bodies. There's certain ways in which that may work. I mean, like very basic idea, but like the very basic sense. But I broke my leg 20 years ago, and I've got there's literally a rod kind of right through my leg. So
that's interesting.
So I mean, there's a certain way already technologies are kind of incorporated into our bodies. So I think there's ways in which that's good and can be productive.
Yeah.
But when it becomes a matter of literally disembodying ourselves, right, of making ourselves into some kind of immortal being inside through some kind of computer, we upload our brains onto something or whatever. Then I think we've crossed the threshold, right? And then it's like what it is. It's a refusal of mortal time, right? And that's the distinction I would draw, right? Mortal time is time which is time that's given to us, first of all, and time that is going to be taken from us, And so, and that involves a certain humility, I think, right? You just recognize that this time has been given, and that it's time that you have the responsibility to live out as best you can. But it's not in your gift. It comes from elsewhere, right?
So in a sense, it's not our time; it's the time we've been given.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The next question I want to ask you is, it's regarding your, and once again, it's a bit of a personal question, but you've spent a lot of your life probably studying death and what it means to die. So how does that affect when you're starting to think one day I'm going to die? Does that help you, or does it change anything, or how does it make you feel that one of the main things, maybe not one of the main things you do with your time, but something you do with your time is think about what it means to die and what will happen when you die? Does that help you with knowing that one day you will die? Because for me, if I was to say what am I scared of, I'm definitely scared of dying, 100%. So how does reading into it, how does that help?
I'm not sure it necessarily helps. I mean, I think if death is, it's as long as there's been human beings, there's been fear of death, right? Because again, to quote one of my philosophical heroes, Martin Heidegger, he talks about Dasein, but let's say human being for the point of argument, is being towards death, right? So that's our being is one that's always towards our end, our mortal end. And that's what defines us, I think. And so it's not just that we die, because other beings die as well, but that we're aware of our death.
Yeah.
And we're aware, and therefore we need to find meaning. You talked about meaning earlier. We need to find meaning in the finitude of our lives.
Yeah.
And then I think the only thing I would say is that I'm not sure it really does help at a personal level, but what it does indicate to me is that that dying is something. How should I put it? There was an idea of the art of death, right? So there's a way of dying.
Yes.
And I think there's something in that, right? It goes back to talking about that we're never just, you talked about in terms of sexuality, but we're never just physical, right? And dying isn't physical either, right? It is physical, of course, but it's not just physical.
Yes.
It's the death of us as the full being that we are. And so to think about it in those terms then means that in dying, that's kind of the farewell to this being that I am. It's and that I would hope that I would die in the feeling of bidding farewell and being grateful for the time that I was given. But we're all human. I can't guarantee that that's going to be what it'll be like. And I'll never be able to. You'll never know, because I'll never be able to tell you.
And no one's coming back. Yeah, no one's coming back to tell me. So and I think you make a really interesting point. It's that feeling of the lack of control. Like in my life, like birth and death are things that just happen to you.
Yeah.
You have no control over that. And I'd like to think, like, you can get up in the morning, decide what you want to have for breakfast. You can decide what you're going to wear. You can do all these things, but the one time then, you don't have any control now.
Yeah.
I think thinking about that nearly brings back to the point of not that how powerless you are, but ultimately there's a start to the story and the end to the story, and what happens in between. Obviously you want it to be as good as possible, but at the end of the day everyone's going to the one place.
Right.
But yeah, definitely something that scares me, but then at the same time it's just going to happen. I can't control that. And the reason it scares me, and you said it, and I'm sure it's the reason, well, I'm fairly sure it's the reason, it's just the lack of control. I would like to think everything I do in my life is so I can have as much control as I can. Now, obviously to a certain extent, but even for instance, like I don't drink alcohol, I never have. And the main reason for that is because if I ever need to make a decision in a certain moment, no matter what, I can, because that's what I want to have control. So like, is the answer to getting comfortable with the lack of control of death is trying to just, like, how is that a muscle I can even train to be like comfortable with just not having as much control as I would like, or how do I sit with that?
Well, I think.
Sorry, I'm putting you in psychologist mode here now. Like, tell me what. Like, I don't mean to do that, but I'm just curious where your philosophical mind will run with that.
Well, I go back to thinking about the givenness here, right? The time is given. It's not. We don't make it. It's given to us. I think our lives are given to us. Yes. And so there's a fundamental lack of control right there, right? And we experience it just simply in terms of our own bodies, right? I mean, there could be some I could have an illness at the moment I don't know of, right? I mean, that's like, so that's a fundamental lack of control, right? Something's in me, in this relationality I talked about, that I'm not aware of, and that could have serious implications. So that's at that very fundamental level, we don't have control. And it seems to me that to live as a mortal being is to live in relation to what that notion of givenness, what is given. That doesn't necessarily lead to a notion of God and divinity. I think it can. I think that's where religions, a lot of religions, not all religions, start from that type of idea that what we have is given, and I think it's so I haven't got any psychological advice, but I do think that it's starting from that premise.
But the given thing, and even I never really, like, obviously I've thought about it like that, but I feel like that really makes a lot more sense to me, because if I've been given life without a choice, I can't be given death and have a choice in it. I'm just going to be given death, which I think that is, that's definitely a different way to look at it. And maybe you can bring that in, I can bring that into my own life a bit more. Some things are just given to you, because I like to think, and look, it goes back to who I am, that, it's all up to me. I can weather any storm, but at the same time, sometimes things are just going to be how they're going to be, The final two of the main questions I want to ask you, they're still relative to death. And now, I'd be asking you to answer a question no one's ever answered, so I'm going to be conscious here what response you can give me. But after we die, do you think that, like, what remains of the self? Like what you said earlier about the self as a relation to things. Now that you're not embodied anymore, let's say, if that's the correct way to put it, what does remain of the self? Does the self remain, or does that just cease to exist? And then maybe you could go the same angle with before birth, did the self even exist? So maybe it's that same thing again, but what does remain after we die? Does anything remain after we die?
I don't know.
Yeah, and that is like the most understandable answer ever, because I know I'm asking you. I just wondering if you had a perspective on that or anything.
I don't particularly. I mean, I think my best guess on this is that there is no self. That the self that I was will cease to exist. Yeah. That's my best guess. Nothing is ever annihilated, right? So nothing is ever just pure physics, right? I mean, things just they can't destroy. Can't destroy, right? I mean, and I think to the extent, like my view here is that one of the problems in Western philosophy, certainly in modernity, is that we've dualistically, or even like in three parts, divided the things into kind of matter, soul, and maybe spirit, right? And to me, there is no soul without materiality. But what that means is that materiality is much more than we've thought it to be, right? So that, and I don't just mean you and me, I mean the material things around us are in some way ensouled. Now, there's a kind of a way of thinking about this called panpsychism in philosophy. I'm not sure I necessarily buy into a lot of what the panpsychics say, but this I do think.
I might have to ask you to define one thing again.
Panpsychism. So panpsychism, basically what psyche is kind of like psychology, right? Mind, right? Yeah. And pan is everything, right? Like pantheism. So it's pantheism. So it's like, so literally everything has mind in some sense, right? Okay. So your rock on the has mind in some sense. It doesn't have consciousness, although some even will want to go that far, but you don't need to go that far, but there's something and the basic idea, I mean, it sounds very counterintuitive, but the basic idea is that if there is mind, which there clearly is, right, we have minds, where did it come from, right? It came from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, either you think that, well, it's not this simple, but you could divide it in this way. Either you think it's given to us by a God who's literally kind of placed it in our bodies, right?
Yeah.
Or that it somehow emerges out of materiality, right?
Yes.
And the panpsychists want to say that's the more plausible view,
Yes.
right? And so I mean, in the fundamentals, I think I agree with that, right?
Okay.
So I think that so there's a certain mental element in materiality. If that's true,
Yes.
then and if this body isn't going to simply dissolve, it's going to disintegrate, but it's not going to dissolve.
Yeah.
Then that continues. So in a bodily way, in a mental way, somehow
It has to
continue. Whether you could stretch that to a spiritual way, I would want to think yes, but I'm not quite sure how to get there.
Yeah.
That there's something in terms of spirituality that is on all of us that somehow continues. But I think and again, talking about something we simply don't know, but where I have a problem with the traditional Christian view of this is, first of all, I don't think it's actually Christian, funnily enough, right? So the idea that we die and go to heaven as souls, right? I by not Christian, I mean, I don't think that's actually what the original ideas in the gospel meant.
Yes.
What they meant, I think, was that, as I say, after the second coming, we'd be reborn in a new world, right? And what's interesting about that is it's a community, it's collective, it's not individual, right?
Yes.
It means that us as a community will experience justice and peace in the new world. The individualistic view that, like, you have to live your life in order to get a reward in an afterlife, where you as an individual will be rewarded. That rests uncomfortably with me. I mean, I think it's rooted. It's very compatible with Western individualism, in a way that
if you do something good, you'll be given something good.
Yeah, and it's you, right? And it's like, and then the idea, then it's kind of like, well, okay, so the person I love most, let's say, doesn't get to this place. I'm not talking personally now, right? But so the person I love most doesn't get to this place. I do. I'm going to be happy. I mean, Thomas Aquinas is a great philosopher, but one of his least good moments spoke about how part of the joy of heaven will be seeing those in hell who weren't good enough to get to where
now we're
you are.
back to the whole violent paradox.
Yeah, well, exactly. Then it becomes now. Aquinas has a lot of really important things to say, but there I think was a weak point. I agree. But there's something implicit in that idea, right? And so how am I going to be happy if it's me? How am I going to be happy if if other people not only aren't there with me, but actually suffering while I'm that I have a huge problem with.
Yeah. And I can say that to me also sounds a bit, even I think that's the exact word I would put on it. It's a bit like of a westernized kind of thought of religion. That concludes all the main blocks. There's probably way more I could have talked about, but I'm conscious of time here. Also, what I want to ask you, there's a few quick fire questions. Now, these are, maybe some of them are based in philosophy, maybe some of them are just more your kind of opinion. A lot of them, from what I'm looking at, might be advice. So you can take them with a grain of salt, or you can just say no.
Yeah, okay.
The first one I want to ask you is, this one isn't too much advice, and this is something I want to ask you anyways, is one book every young person should read before they turn 25. And maybe it doesn't even have to be a specific book. Maybe it can just be someone to read into. Like an author or something that has an interesting message for younger people that you think would be valuable for the rest of their life.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. It's just kind of thinking about one and all of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
How many books have you read too, you know?
Well, I think I would want to be a novelist rather than a philosopher. I think
that's an interesting perspective, because I didn't think you would say that. So that's very cool.
Yeah, I think so. I'm not that I'm wanting to discourage people reading philosophy. But I mean, the name that crops into my mind is Dostoevsky.
Okay.
With a little bit hackneyed maybe, but I think Dostoevsky really, like Crime and Punishment, really can really kind of speak to some fundamental issues.
Yes.
If you want to really kind of freak yourself out, but also get a kind of a really prescient view of modern society, then Kafka.
Kafka, yeah. I've seen a lot of Franz Kafka, but is he mainly like essays and short stories more than he is? Yeah, because that's another question I want to ask you. The whole essays and are essays, you would encourage just reading essays and not needing to have a full story, just read an essay. Is that, because I feel like that's something that, like, when I thought of even reading essays, man, I'm not reading an essay. That's like, why would I do that? I need to read a book. But are essays still, you would recommend essays are?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, reading is about kind of engaging with another human being who's trying to kind of think through issues that are not significant to you, right? And so, I mean, there's some really good essayists out there. Absolutely.
I know. I'll definitely give a look in Kafka. I'll definitely give a look in Dostoevsky. I think I actually have some books at home that. I feel like they were DNF'd. I got to like 90 pages on Crime and Punishment, and I was like, he's after spending like 2 or 3 pages. It's just a block. There's no dents, there's no paragraphs. It's just a block. But I think I do need to go back and challenge myself. It's important to challenge myself.
And with the Russians, novelists generally, I mean, it's a lot of reading and a lot of kind of digressions that take you forever. But it's I think it's worth it, and Brother Karamazov obviously as well. So it's worth it with Dostoevsky, I think. But if you want something short and it's kind of freaks you out a bit, but Kafka, like Metamorphosis in Kafka.
I've heard of Metamorphosis. Yeah, I'll give it a read.
It's amazing read. Yeah.
Metamorphosis. Okay. This is like a really general question, and I don't even know if this can be quickfire or not. But optimist or pessimist about the next 20 years? I'm tempted to quote my Heidegger again, who said that, you know, he's talking in the 1930s now, but he's talking we're way past, and words I'm parafrasing. But basically, we're way past optimism and pessimism, right? That's a fair answer.
I think we're way past optimism and pessimism. I think it's a matter because, you know. I'd say optimism and pessimism are both kind of thinking, well, either things are going to work out or they're not. I think
it's very binary once again, isn't it? That's what I'm noticing. Is you're saying like it's not a binary answer.
Yeah, I think things have to change fundamentally. Like I don't think if you're asking me, you know, how things are now, are they going to work out well or not? Well, no, they're not, because they're just going in the. It just seems to me so blatantly clear they're going in the wrong direction. If we can make a transformation of our way of life in society, then that's another question.
Yeah, that's another question. Yeah. Comfort or challenge? Which do young people actually need more of right now? Sorry, we're going binary again. I'm seeing all these questions are binary.
I would say, well, if I had to choose, I'd say challenge. I think young people, like your generation, are facing into issues and kind of problems that, to be honest, I find it hard, sometimes hard to really comprehend or imagine. I mean, I think, and that's
I'm not worried at all now.
But just because we're going into territory, like we haven't even talked about AI. But you think about AI.
We're coming back for round 2. Round 2 is coming.
Like, I mean, it just boggles the mind, right? I mean, and not so much like machine learning. That's been, you know, we've had that
for years.
And like, you know, and that it's developed the way it is not overly surprising, I guess. But that of all things known to humanity, we decide that the Wild West was the best model for AI is just it's just
yeah.
you know, and that's what we've got, right?
Yeah.
We've got a Wild West of no regulation, of competition, with something that the very people who are developing it say it's a 50-50 chance it could destroy humanity. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, right? And so I think, you know, so basically, I think, I think the world that we're kind of moving into is filled of so many challenges that it's hard to get your head around. But thinking about habits, right? I think your generation have to develop the habits of confronting challenges because they're there.
There's a few
like
on the way.
Yeah.
AI. That's. I actually made like a little just solo podcast with myself there last week, and I was talking about Elon Musk, and Elon Musk was essentially saying that he's like, he was saying that the relationship between us and chimpanzees is what it's going to be like between us and AI in like 10 years. He says money won't exist in 10 years. He says AI will be smarter than us in 5 years. He says that AI will be in charge of us all in 10 years because it will be the most rational and being able to make all the choices. And you know what? I'm not going to open that can of worms again, because that's something that is, to me, makes absolutely no sense. And what you said about the Wild West, I could sit here for an hour, or I could sit here for literally say 2 words and call it Wild West. That's how it is. And and that's something that that's another thing I'm scared about is AI. Death and AI, they're the 2 things. And my mother when she gets angry as well. So we'll put in 3 things, and probably my dad too. But yeah, challenge. I do agree. I think challenge is probably better off. The final question I'm going to ask you is: what's a philosophical question you still can't answer after all this time?
I want to say every philosophical question.
All of them.
I mean, it's the nature of philosophical questions, right?
Is there one that just racks your brain completely? What's one that just it nearly keeps you up at night?
What would be the philosophical question? It would certainly be a metaphysical question, right? It'd be a question about, you know, the kind of the nature of reality and how we understand it. I guess maybe that kind of what I kind of touched on before about the panpsychism is, you know, to what extent can we understand things, that relationship, the broader question, how that relationship, how such beings, say material beings, rocks or whatever, right up to human beings. How do we understand that as a continuum of some sort, right? Okay. That there's no fundamental difference between them, and yet there is a very significant difference, right? That human beings can reflect, can think about things like meaning of things, have we haven't really talked about ethics, but have ethics, right? Have ethical,
of course,
ethical kind of, you know, I mean, it's like in the end of the day, and some people kind of disagree with this, but in the end of the day, I mean, like when a lion attacks a you know, prey, it doesn't, I do not for a moment believe that it ever enters its head, well, is this ethically right or not, right?
Is this my enemy? Is this?
Yeah, no, exactly. Whereas with us, like even as you say, somebody attacking a loved one, it's still a question. I mean, you may at the moment kind of react, but you'll still at some stage ask yourself the question, was that right or wrong, right?
Yes.
And so it's kind of like trying to understand, okay, where does that come from?
Yeah.
And then how that then relates to a notion of divinity, because I do think the whether there is a God in the traditional sense is another question, but divinity, I think, is inescapable in my view. I think the notion of the divine is inescapable. Yeah. The problem philosophically is to make sense of it. So how do you make sense? So that's my answer. So it's a very long-winded answer. But
we got there, though.
We got there. Exactly.
That's what matters.
It's that connection between divinity on the one hand and material existence on the other. How do you think them somehow as all belonging to the same cosmos, but nonetheless distinct? Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you. That was fun.